The January wind cut through Red Hollow like a promise of suffering. Evelyn Mercer stood at her husband's graveside with mud on her boots and ice forming in her hair, watching 6 men lower Thomas into frozen ground that didn't want him. The preacher spoke words that meant nothing. The townspeople shifted their weight, impatient for the free whiskey being poured back at the house. Nobody cried except her, and even her tears felt like a betrayal, because Thomas Mercer hadn't been a good man. He just hadn't been cruel enough to prepare her for what came next. The funeral lasted 17 minutes. The vultures arrived in 20. "Mrs. Mercer," Silas's voice came from behind her, smooth as snake oil and twice as poisonous. "We need to discuss the estate." She didn't turn around, couldn't. If she looked at him now, she'd spit in his face, and there were too many witnesses. "Tomorrow," she said. "Today." His hand landed on her shoulder, heavy and possessive. The lawyer's already at the house, waiting. The crowd parted as Silas guided her away from the grave, his grip tight enough to bruise through her black wool coat. She caught glimpses of faces as they walked. Widow Patterson with her tight-lipped disapproval, Sheriff Garrett lighting a cigarette like this was entertainment, the butcher's wife whispering behind her gloved hand. They all knew something she didn't. The realization settled into her stomach like swallowed glass. The Mercer Ranch house sat 2 miles outside town, a sprawling structure Thomas had built with money he'd never quite explained. Evelyn had turned it into something resembling a home, curtains in the windows, bread baking most mornings, account books she kept meticulous and honest because someone had to. Now it felt like a trap she'd walked into with her eyes wide open. The lawyer waited in Thomas's study, a weasel-faced man named Hutchins, who'd been on the Mercer payroll since before Evelyn arrived. He barely looked at her as she entered, just shuffled papers with the bored efficiency of a man performing a ritual he'd done 100 times before. "Mrs. Mercer, please sit." She remained standing. "What's this about?" Silas closed the door behind them with a soft click that sounded like a cell locking. He moved to stand beside the desk, one hand resting on the leather chair that had been Thomas's, his posture making it clear whose chair it was now. Hutchins cleared his throat. "Your late husband's will contained certain provisions. Given the unusual circumstances of the estate and the significant assets involved, Mr. Thomas Mercer made arrangements to ensure the property remains within the family." "I'm his family," Evelyn said. "By marriage." Silas's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Not by blood." The first spike of real fear pierced through her grief. Hutchins slid a document across the desk. "According to the terms outlined here, you have 30 days from the date of Mr. Mercer's death to enter into marriage with his brother and heir, Silas Mercer. Should you agree, the estate will pass to Mr. Silas Mercer, and you will retain your position as a Mercer wife with all associated privileges and protections." The words didn't make sense. Evelyn read them twice, then a third time, waiting for the meaning to shift into something rational. "And if I refuse?" "Then you forfeit all claims to the property, land, and assets." Hutchins spoke like he was reciting a recipe. "You would be entitled to whatever personal effects you brought into the marriage, of course. Your clothes, any jewelry that wasn't a Mercer family piece. The estate provides a one-time payment of $50 for relocation expenses." $50. She'd helped build this ranch from 30 acres of scrubland into 300 acres of profitable cattle and crop rotation. She'd managed the accounts, negotiated with suppliers, worked alongside the hands during harvest when they were short-staffed. She'd turned Thomas's reckless spending into something sustainable, his chaos into order, and they were offering her $50. "This isn't legal." Her voice came out steady, which surprised her. "A widow has rights. Thomas's property passes to me as his wife." "Normally, yes." Hutchins folded his hands like a patient schoolteacher. "However, Mr. Mercer signed this document 3 years ago, properly witnessed and notarized. It supersedes standard inheritance law in Montana Territory. The provision is unusual but not unprecedented, particularly in cases where significant family assets are concerned." 3 years ago. Evelyn looked at Silas, who watched her with the lazy attention of a cat studying a wounded bird. "When did you have Thomas sign this?" "I didn't have him do anything." Silas moved around the desk, closer. "Thomas understood family legacy. He understood that everything we built together needed protection." "Everything you built?" The laugh that escaped her was sharp enough to cut. "Thomas told me you hadn't spoken in 5 years. Said you tried to cheat him out of his share when your father died. Something flickered across Silas's face. Anger quickly smoothed away. My brother said a lot of things, especially after he started drinking. The accusation hung in the air like gun smoke. Thomas had drunk, yes, heavily, toward the end. Evelyn had found him passed out in the barn more nights than she could count, reeking of whiskey and regret. But he'd never been violent, never cruel, just broken in ways she couldn't fix. I need time to think, she said. Of course. Silas's voice dripped false sympathy. You have 30 days, but Evelyn... He said her name like he was trying it on, testing how it felt in his mouth. I should mention that the ranch hands have been informed. The bank knows. The town knows. Everyone understands what's expected here. Expected. You're a young woman alone in a hard territory. No family, no prospects. He stepped closer, and she smelled whiskey and tobacco. I'm offering you security, protection, a life better than anything you had before Thomas. She wanted to spit that she'd had a life before Thomas. Had worked in a dress shop in Denver, saved every penny, dreamed of owning her own store someday. Thomas had swept her into a whirlwind courtship that felt like romance until she realized it was just momentum. His need for someone to clean up after him, cook his meals, pretend his life made sense. But she'd made it work, made it hers. I'll give you my answer in a week, she said. Silas's smile sharpened. You'll give me your answer when I ask for it, but I'm a patient man. He turned to Hutchins. Make sure she has a copy of the will, and the contact information for relocating if she chooses differently. They left her there in Thomas's study, surrounded by his tobacco-stained furniture and the silence of a life she'd never really owned. Evelyn didn't move for a long time. When she finally did, she walked to the desk and picked up the will with shaking hands. Read it again, looking for loopholes, escape clauses, anything. The document was airtight, witnessed by Judge Morrison and notarized by a clerk who'd probably been paid well to ask no questions. 30 days. She folded the paper carefully and tucked it into her pocket, then walked through the house she'd spent 4 years making livable, past the kitchen where she'd learned to bake bread the way Thomas liked it, past the bedroom where she'd lain awake so many nights listening to him mumble in his sleep about debts and dangers she never understood. In the small room she'd claimed as her own workspace, she pulled out the account ledgers she'd kept hidden from Thomas. He'd never cared about the details, just wanted to know if they could afford his next bottle or poker game. But Evelyn had tracked everything, every sale, every purchase, every dollar that moved through the ranch. The numbers told a story Thomas had never wanted her to read. 3 years ago, right when this will had been signed, the ranch had received a massive influx of cash, $30,000, listed as a family investment. The payments had continued monthly, smaller amounts, but consistent, always from an account registered to Silas Mercer. Thomas hadn't built anything. Silas had bought him, and now he wanted to collect. The next morning, Evelyn woke to find supplies missing from the barn. Feed for the horses, tools, half the winter firewood she'd spent October stacking. The ranch hand who'd worked for them 2 years, a decent man named Carter, was gone. His cabin stood empty, door swinging in the wind. She walked into town that afternoon, her black morning dress drawing stares and whispers. At the general store, Mrs. Patterson refused to meet her eyes while measuring out flour. I'll need it on credit until I settle the estate, Evelyn said. Can't do that anymore. Mrs. Patterson's voice was flat. Silas said all Mercer accounts need his approval now. The ranch account is in my name. Not according to the bank. The older woman finally looked up, and her expression wasn't unkind, just resigned. I'm sorry, dear, but you're not a Mercer anymore. Not unless you marry into it proper. Evelyn left without the flour. At the bank, the manager gave her the same answer. At the feed store, the blacksmith, the doctor's office, where she tried to settle Thomas's final bill. Everywhere she went, doors closed, politely but firmly. Silas had moved fast. She was walking back toward the ranch when she saw him, sitting on the porch of Red Hollow's only hotel, holding court with Sheriff Garrett and Judge Morrison. 3 men who ran this town like their own private kingdom. Silas raised his hand in a lazy wave. She kept walking. Mrs. Mercer! His voice carried across the street. A moment? Evelyn stopped, trapped by the eyes watching from every window, every doorway. In Red Hollow, You didn't ignore Silas Mercer in public, not if you wanted to keep living there. She crossed the street with her spine straight and her hands clasped to hide their shaking. Gentlemen? She nodded to the judge and sheriff, who both looked away like she was something unfortunate they'd stepped in. I hear you've been having trouble in town. Silas leaned back in his chair, the picture of relaxed power. That's unfortunate. If you'd accepted my proposal already, none of this would be necessary. Your proposal. She tasted acid. Is that what we're calling it? I'm calling it an opportunity. He stood, moving close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. Silas was a big man, broad-shouldered and thick through the chest, with the kind of size that looked impressive until you noticed the meanness in his eyes. You're a smart woman, Evelyn. Smarter than Thomas deserved. You kept his ranch running when he was too drunk to remember his own name. That takes skill. Thomas wasn't oops. Thomas was a drunk and a fool. Silas said it loud enough for the street to hear. Everyone knows it. The only thing he did right was marry a woman strong enough to clean up his messes. I'm offering you a chance to do the same thing, but with a husband who'll appreciate it. Sheriff Garrett chuckled. Evelyn's hands curled into fists inside her coat pockets. I need more time. You need to be practical. Silas reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the gesture intimate and possessive. Several people on the street stopped to watch. Winter's coming down hard. The ranch can't run itself. You can't run it alone, I've made sure of that. Your choices are marry me or leave with nothing. And Evelyn? His thumb brushed her cheekbone. I really hope you choose to stay. She jerked away from his touch, and his smile widened. 3 weeks, he said. I'll give you 3 weeks to mourn properly. Then we'll have a wedding this town won't forget. He turned and walked back to his chair, dismissing her like a servant. Evelyn stood there for 5 seconds that felt like 5 hours, feeling the weight of every stare, every whisper. Then she walked away with her head high and her stomach churning. She made it to the edge of town before she vomited into the ditch. Basosin. That night, someone tried to burn down the barn. Evelyn woke to the smell of smoke and the sound of horses screaming. She ran outside in her nightgown and bare feet, already knowing what she'd find. Flames climbed the south wall of the barn, hungry and orange against the black sky. The horses kicked their stalls in panic. If the fire reached the hayloft, everything would go up. She grabbed buckets, worked the pump until her arms screamed, threw water on flames that seemed to laugh at her efforts. The heat blistered her face. Smoke choked her lungs. She was losing. Then hands grabbed the bucket from her. Get the horses out! A man she didn't recognize, tall, rangy, with dark hair and a face shadowed by the fire, shoved past her and started organizing a bucket line from the well. 2 more men appeared from nowhere, working with the grim efficiency of people who'd fought fires before. Evelyn ran into the barn. The smoke was thicker inside, black and poisonous. She couldn't see, couldn't breathe. Found the first stall by touch and threw the bolt, then slapped the horse hard on the rump to drive it toward the door. Did it again. Again. Lost count. Something in the hayloft exploded with a roar like thunder. Get out! Someone grabbed her around the waist and hauled her backward. It's coming down! She fought him, tried to go back for the last horse, but he was stronger. Dragged her out into the cold air just as part of the roof collapsed inward with a shower of sparks. They hit the ground hard. Evelyn rolled, gasping, her lungs full of smoke and her eyes streaming. Above her, the stranger who'd pulled her out was silhouetted against the burning barn, and for a moment he looked like something from a fever dream, all sharp angles and firelight. You got a death wish? He demanded. There's still... She coughed so hard she retched. 1 more horse. Already out. Your mysterious helpers got it. Evelyn looked around and realized he was right. 5 horses stood in the paddock, wild-eyed but alive. The barn was still burning, but the fire hadn't spread to the house or other buildings. Men she didn't recognize worked in careful silence to contain it. Who are you? She struggled to her feet, swaying. Who are they? The stranger studied her with eyes that caught the firelight strange. Name's Rowan Cade, and those men are leaving, so I wouldn't look too close. She looked anyway, but they were already melting into the darkness beyond the firelight. One tipped his hat to her. Another made a gesture she thought might be a blessing or a ward against evil, hard to tell. Then they were gone like smoke. What the hell is happening? Evelyn's voice cracked. Who sent you? Rowan Cade pulled off his gloves and tucked them in his belt. Up close, she could see he was younger than she'd first thought. Maybe 30, with the kind of weathered face that came from sleeping under stars more than roofs. He wore trail clothes, good quality but worn, and carried a rifle slung across his back like it was part of his skeleton. Nobody sent me. He looked at the burning barn, then back at her. I came on my own. Heard you might need help. From who? Your husband had friends you didn't know about. One of them asked me to check on you after... He gestured vaguely. After everything. Evelyn's head spun. Smoke inhalation, shock, exhaustion. It all crashed into her at once. Thomas is dead. I know. Someone tried to burn my barn. I know that too. And you just happen to be here? With friends who fight fires and disappear? Rowan's mouth twitched. Might have been a smile. I've been here 3 days, watching, waiting to see what Silas would do. The name hit her like a slap. You know about Silas? Everyone within 100 miles knows about Silas Mercer. Rowan pulled a canteen from his saddle, and she realized for the first time that there was a horse tied near the house, patient and still, and handed it to her. Drink. Then we need to talk somewhere the whole territory can't hear us. She drank. Water, clear and cold, washing the taste of smoke from her throat. When she lowered the canteen, she found him watching her with an expression she couldn't name. I don't know you, she said. No. I don't trust you. Smart. But you saved my barn. Most of it. He glanced at the smoldering ruin. South wall's gone. You'll need to rebuild before snow. Evelyn laughed, and it came out broken. I won't be here for snow. Silas is taking the ranch. Taking everything. Only if you let him. I don't have a choice. You do. Rowan Cade stepped closer, and she saw something in his face that made her breath catch. Not desire, not pity, but recognition. Like he was looking at someone he'd met before in a different life. It's a hard choice. Dangerous. Might get you killed. But Evelyn Mercer, he said her name carefully, like it mattered. You've got a choice nobody can take away. Not Silas, not the law, not this whole damn town. What choice? He smiled then, and it was nothing like Silas's smile. It was sharp and reckless and entirely honest. You can run. They talked until dawn in her kitchen, speaking low while the barn's ruins cooled outside. Rowan told her things she'd suspected but never proven. That Silas controlled half the judges in Montana territory, that Sheriff Garrett was on his payroll, that the will forcing her marriage had been legal enough to pass inspection, but the circumstances around Thomas signing it were questionable. He was drunk, Rowan said, brought to a lawyer's office in the middle of the night 3 years back. Silas held his debts, gambling mostly, drinking. Thomas owed him near $40,000 by then. $40,000. Evelyn felt sick. The investments in the ledgers weren't investments, were loans, with terms Thomas couldn't hope to meet. Rowan poured himself coffee from the pot she'd made and drank it black. Silas has been planning this since your wedding day, maybe before. He saw Thomas marry a capable woman and decided he wanted that capability for himself. So he waited for Thomas to die. Didn't have to wait long. Man was drinking himself to death before you met him. You probably added 3 years to his life just by keeping him fed and functional. It should have hurt more, hearing her marriage reduced to those terms. But Evelyn had known. Maybe not consciously, but somewhere deep down, she'd known Thomas was running from something, and she'd been convenient shelter. How do you know all this? She asked. Rowan was quiet for a moment. Your husband and I met about a year back, in a saloon in Billings. He was drunk, talking about his brother, about being trapped. I listened. We talked a few times after that. He never said much, but before he died, he sent me a letter. Asked me to check on you if anything happened. Why would he do that? He barely knew you. Because he knew what Silas would do. And he knew you'd need someone who wasn't afraid of him. Rowan met her eyes. I'm not afraid of Silas Mercer. You should be. Probably, but I'm not. Evelyn wrapped her hands around her own coffee cup, feeling the warmth seep into her cold fingers. Outside, false dawn was turning the sky gray. Soon the town would wake. Soon people would come to see the damage, offer false sympathy, report back to Silas. You said I could run. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. Where? West, California maybe, Oregon, somewhere beyond Silas's reach. He'll follow. At first, but his power has limits. It's wide here, but not deep. Get far enough and you're free. With nothing, $50 in the clothes I'm wearing. Rowan reached into his coat and pulled out a leather portfolio, worn but expensive. He laid it on the table between them. Thomas sent me this too. Said if anything happened, you should have it. Didn't say what's in it. Evelyn opened it with shaking hands. Inside were papers. Lots of them. Property deeds in Thomas's name. Land Silas didn't know about, purchased under false names. Bank deposit slips from accounts in Denver and San Francisco. Letters detailing loans Silas had made to territorial officials. Amounts and dates carefully recorded. And a letter, in Thomas's unsteady handwriting. Evelyn, if you're reading this, I'm dead and you've met Rowan. Trust him. He's one of the good ones, and there aren't many left. Everything in here is yours. I bought it with money from before Silas got his hooks in me. Clean money, earned honest. Not much, but enough to start over if you're brave. I'm sorry for what I've left you with. Sorry for being weak. Sorry for not being the man you deserved. But maybe I can give you this one thing, a way out. Don't marry Silas. Run. T. Evelyn read it twice, then carefully folded it and placed it back in the portfolio. Her hands were steady now. How much is in the accounts? She asked. Rowan had clearly already looked. About 8,000. Enough to disappear with. Buy a new name, a new life. $8,000. A fortune. Thomas had saved her after all. If I run, she said slowly, Silas will hunt me. You said it yourself. Yes. He'll send men, sheriffs, bounty hunters. Probably. And you're offering to help me anyway. Why? Rowan looked away, jaw tight. When he spoke, his voice was rough. Because 3 years ago, I knew a woman in a situation like yours. Married to a man who owned her, controlled her, broke her piece by piece. She asked me for help, and I said no. Told myself it wasn't my business, that she'd made her choice. He stopped, and Evelyn waited. Found her 2 weeks later, in the river, weighted down with stones from her own kitchen. The silence that followed was absolute. I won't say no again, Rowan finished. Not ever. So if you want to run, I'll get you out. If you want to fight, I'll fight beside you. And if you want to marry Silas and make the best of it, his eyes met hers, honest and hard. I'll respect that choice too. But I needed you to know you have options. Dawn light spilled through the kitchen window, turning everything golden. Evelyn thought about the life she'd built here. The garden she'd planted. The curtains she'd sewn. The account books she'd kept so carefully. Then she thought about Silas's hand on her shoulder, his thumb on her cheek, the way he'd looked at her like she was livestock being appraised. I need 2 days, she said. Rowan nodded. I'll be close. When you're ready, hang a white cloth from the barn loft. I'll come after dark. And if I don't, then I'll know you made your choice and I'll leave you to it. He stood, and she stood with him. At the door he paused. For what it's worth, he said, Thomas was right about one thing. You deserve better than this. Then he was gone, melting into the morning shadows like he'd never been there. Evelyn stood in her kitchen and watched the sun rise over the burned barn, over the ranch she'd bled for, over the town that had already decided her fate. And she started planning her escape. The next morning, Silas came to inspect the damage. He arrived with Sheriff Garrett and 4 ranch hands Evelyn recognized from properties Silas owned south of town. They rode up slow and deliberate, making sure she saw them coming from half a mile out. Evelyn met them in the yard, still in her morning dress, but with her hair pinned tight and her face scrubbed clean of ash. She'd spent an hour that morning making herself look composed, untouchable, a woman who hadn't spent half the night coughing up black phlegm and planning escape routes. Evelyn. Silas dismounted with the careful movements of a man who wanted everyone watching. I heard about the fire. Terrible thing. Yes. He walked toward the barn's ruins without waiting for invitation, boots crunching on charred wood. The other men fanned out, looking at the house, the paddock, the root cellar. searching for something or someone. Sheriff Garrett stopped near Evelyn, thumbs hooked in his belt. You see who started it? I was asleep when it started. Lucky you woke up. Could have lost everything. He squinted at her. Could have lost yourself. I suppose. Who helped you fight it? Silas called from inside the barn. I hear there were men here. Witnesses saw the fire from town, said there were at least 3 people working the bucket line. Evelyn's pulse kicked, but her face stayed smooth. Drifters. They heard the horses and came to help, left before I could thank them properly. Drifters. Silas emerged from the wreckage, brushing soot from his coat. Convenient. Very. He crossed the space between them slow, eyes locked on hers. You wouldn't be lying to me, would you? Why would I lie? I don't know, Evelyn. Why would you? He reached out and touched her cheek, the same possessive gesture he had made in town. This time she didn't pull away, just stood there and let him. You've got ash in your hair, smoke in your clothes. You look like you've been through hell. I have. Then maybe you're ready to stop fighting what's inevitable. His thumb traced her jaw. Marry me, today, right now. I'll rebuild this barn twice as big. I'll put hands back on the property. I'll make sure you never have to fight another fire alone. One of the ranch hands was walking toward the house. Evelyn tracked him from the corner of her eye. I told you I need time, she said. And I'm telling you, time's run out. Silas's voice hardened. Someone burned your barn, Evelyn. Someone's sending you a message. This ranch isn't safe for a woman alone. Hell, this whole territory isn't safe. You need protection. From who? The person who burned my barn or you? His hand tightened on her jaw, just enough to hurt, just enough to make his point. Careful. Mrs. Mercer? The ranch hand had reached the kitchen door. There's coffee still hot in here, fresh pot. Evelyn's stomach dropped. She'd made coffee for Rowan hours ago, had been too rattled to clean up properly after he left. If they went inside, they'd see 2 cups on the table. They'd know. Leave it, Silas said, not looking away from Evelyn. We're not staying. The hand hesitated, then backed away from the door. Silas released her face and stepped back, studying her like a puzzle he was close to solving. You've got 1 week, 7 days. Then we're getting married whether you agree or not. Judge Morrison will perform the ceremony. The whole town will attend. And after, he smiled, we'll have a long talk about honesty between husbands and wives. He remounted his horse and gestured for the others to follow. Sheriff Garrett tipped his hat to Evelyn with something that might have been sympathy or might have been mockery. They rode out the same way they'd come, slow and visible. Evelyn waited until they disappeared over the ridge before she allowed herself to shake. Inside, she dumped both coffee cups and scrubbed them until her knuckles were raw. Burned Thomas's letter in the stove and scattered the ashes. Hid the leather portfolio under a loose floorboard in her workroom where she'd hidden her personal ledgers. Then she went to work. She had 2 days. Rowan had given her 2 days, but Silas had just shortened that to 1 week total, and she didn't trust him to wait even that long. The fire had been a warning. The visit had been an inspection. Next would come force. Evelyn moved through the house like a woman cataloging a museum. Everything here was Thomas's, or belonged to the Mercer family legacy, or had been purchased with money she now knew came from Silas's loans. The only things truly hers were the clothes she'd brought from Denver, a silver locket her mother had given her before she died, and the wedding ring Thomas had placed on her finger 4 years ago. She packed a small carpet bag with 2 dresses, undergarments, the locket, and her most recent ledger, the one that tracked the ranch's actual finances separate from the mess Thomas had made. Everything else she left exactly where it was, the ring she kept on her finger. She'd decide later whether to sell it or throw it in the first river she crossed. In the workroom, she retrieved the portfolio and studied the documents inside more carefully. Thomas had been smarter than she'd given him credit for, at least in this. The properties he'd purchased were scattered across 3 territories. Small parcels, nothing that would draw attention, all in names that couldn't be traced back to Mercer money. The bank accounts were real, she confirmed by checking the dates and deposit amounts against her own records of the ranch's good years. He'd been siphoning money away from Silas for at least 5 years, building an escape he'd known he'd never use. You stupid, sad man, she whispered to the empty room. Why didn't you just leave? But she knew why. Thomas had been weak where it counted, too afraid of Silas, too trapped by his own debts and failures. He'd built her an exit but couldn't walk through it himself. Well, she wouldn't make the same mistake. Evelyn spent the rest of the day working the ranch like normal, fed the horses, mucked stalls, checked the fence line on the east pasture where cattle had been breaking through. Anyone watching from a distance would see a widow going through her daily routine, trying to maintain some normalcy after tragedy. They wouldn't see her memorizing every trail, every shortcut, every back route off this property that didn't lead directly to town. As the sun started dropping, she made dinner, sat at the kitchen table and ate mechanically, tasting nothing, washed her plate and cup, banked the stove fire. Then she climbed to the barn loft. The fire had gutted the south side, but the north loft was still intact. She found a white cotton sheet in a trunk Thomas had stored up here years ago, full of things he'd meant to sell or mend or deal with eventually. She tied the sheet to the loft railing where it would catch the moonlight and hung it like a surrender flag, like a distress signal, like a decision made. Rowan came 3 hours after full dark. She didn't hear him approach. One moment she was sitting in the kitchen with a single lamp burning, the next he was tapping soft on the window glass. Evelyn opened the door and he slipped inside, moving quiet as smoke. "You hung the signal," he said. "I did." "You're sure?" She looked at him, this stranger who'd materialized out of her dead husband's guilty conscience, who'd saved her barn and offered her impossible choices. He watched her back with eyes that had seen things he'd never talk about, waiting for her answer without pressure or judgment. "Silas came this morning," she said. "Gave me 1 week, but he won't wait that long. I could see it in his face." "Then we leave tonight." "Tonight?" Her voice cracked. "I thought I had—" "You have right now. That's all any of us ever have." Rowan moved to the window, checking the yard. "I've got 2 horses ready. Supplies for a week, maybe more if we're careful. There's a trail north through the mountains, rough going, but it keeps us off the main roads. We can make the territorial line in 4 days if we push hard." Evelyn's hands were shaking again. "I need to pack. What you need is already packed or doesn't matter." He turned back to her. "Anything in this house worth dying for?" She thought about that, really thought about it. "No," she said finally. "Nothing." "Then get your coat and whatever you can't live without. We ride in 10 minutes." She grabbed the carpet bag she'd prepared, added the portfolio from under the floorboards, and wrapped herself in the warmest coat she owned. At the last second, she went to Thomas's study and took the small framed photograph of her parents from the shelf, the only picture she had of them. Rowan was waiting by the back door with 2 horses. One was his own, a rangy buckskin gelding with intelligent eyes. The other was a sturdy mare Evelyn didn't recognize. "She's sound," Rowan said, helping her tie the carpet bag behind the saddle. "Belonged to a friend. He owed me a favor." "What kind of friend loans out horses in the middle of the night?" "The kind who doesn't ask questions." He checked the cinch, then boosted her into the saddle before she could overthink it. "You know how to ride?" "Well enough." "Good enough isn't good enough tonight. Keep up or we both die. Understand?" The bluntness shocked her into clarity. "I understand." "Then let's go." They rode north through fields Evelyn had walked 100 times in daylight, now rendered strange and threatening by moonlight. Rowan set a hard pace, pushing the horses faster than she would have dared on unfamiliar ground. But the mare moved sure-footed beneath her, and Evelyn found a rhythm despite her fear. Behind them, the ranch house grew smaller. The burned barn, the life she'd tried to build, all of it disappearing into darkness. They'd ridden maybe an hour when Rowan suddenly reined in, hand raised for silence. Evelyn stopped beside him, heart hammering. "What?" "Listen." At first she heard nothing but wind and her own pulse. Then, distant but growing closer, hoofbeats. Multiple horses, moving fast. They found the signal. Rowan's voice was grim. "Or someone saw us leave. Either way, they're coming." "How many?" "At least 4. Maybe more." He scanned the terrain, calculating. "There's a creek bed about a mile east. We can lose them in the water, but we have to move now." They ran. Evelyn had ridden hard before, racing Thomas back from town on summer evenings, chasing loose cattle during storms. But this was different. This was riding like the ground was collapsing behind them, like hell itself was in pursuit. The mare stretched out beneath her, hooves pounding, breath coming in great heaving gasps. The creek appeared suddenly, a dark gash cutting through the prairie. Rowan didn't slow, just drove his horse straight down the bank and into the water. Evelyn followed, feeling the mare stumble and recover, icy water splashing up to her knees. "Upstream," Rowan called over the noise of their passage. "Stay in the water, it'll hide our tracks." They rode through the creek for what felt like miles, water numbing Evelyn's legs, the cold seeping through her boots. Her teeth chattered, her hands cramped on the reins. But she kept going because stopping meant capture, and capture meant Silas. Finally, Rowan guided them up the far bank into a stand of pine trees that smelled sharp and clean after the creek's mineral bite. He dismounted and grabbed both horses' bridles, hand over their noses to keep them quiet. In the distance, they heard the search party reach the creek. Voices carried on the night air, angry and frustrated. Someone was shouting orders. Someone else was arguing about which direction to search. "Split up," a voice commanded. Evelyn recognized it. Sheriff Garrett. "Jenkins, take 2 men downstream. I'll take the rest upstream. She couldn't have gotten far." "What about the man with her?" Another voice, this one unfamiliar. "Shoot him. Silas wants the woman alive, but he didn't say nothing about her accomplice." Evelyn's breath caught. Rowan's hand tightened on the horses. The search party divided. 3 riders splashed upstream toward their position. 3 more headed the opposite direction. They waited. The riders came closer. 50 yards. 40. Close enough that Evelyn could see the shapes of men on horseback, could hear their conversation about the reward Silas was offering. $500 for whoever brings her back, one said. "That's more than I make in a year." "Only if we find her. Woman like that, city-bred, she won't last a night in this country." "Then we'd better find her before the cold does. Dead woman's worth nothing." They were 20 yards away when one of the horses snorted. The searchers stopped. Evelyn pressed her face against the mare's neck, willing herself invisible. Beside her, Rowan had gone completely still, one hand on his rifle. "You hear that?" one of the searchers said. "Just the wind." "Didn't sound like wind." A long, terrible silence. Then, "Come on. They went downstream, I'm telling you. Woman that's scared would run with the current, not against it." The riders moved on. Evelyn didn't breathe again until they were out of sight, and even then it came out shaky and too loud. "We can't stay here," Rowan whispered. "They'll double back when they don't find tracks downstream. We need distance." "I can't," her voice broke. "I can't ride anymore. I can't feel my legs." "You can." He grabbed her shoulders, forced her to look at him. "You're cold and you're scared and you've never done anything like this before. But you can ride, Evelyn. You've been doing it for an hour. You can do it for 6 more. 6 hours? To the mountains. Once we're in the high country, we'll have cover, hiding places. But we have to get there before dawn, or they'll track us in daylight." She wanted to argue, wanted to collapse, wanted to wake up and discover this was all some terrible nightmare. Instead, she nodded and hauled herself back into the saddle, biting down on a whimper as her frozen legs protested. They rode. The night stretched into something endless and surreal. Evelyn lost track of time, of distance, of everything except the mare's movement beneath her and Rowan's silhouette ahead. Sometimes she heard the search party in the distance. Sometimes she heard nothing but wind and her own labored breathing. Once, she nearly fell asleep in the saddle and jerked awake as she started to slide sideways. Rowan appeared beside her immediately, steadying her, his hand warm through her coat. "Not much farther," he said, though she couldn't tell if he was lying. The mountains materialized slowly from the darkness, black shapes against a slightly less black sky. As they climbed, the terrain changed. Prairie grass gave way to scrub pine, then real forest. The air grew thinner and colder. Evelyn's lungs burned with each breath. Dawn was just starting to gray the eastern sky when Rowan finally stopped. "Here," he said, "we rest here." Here was a small clearing surrounded by dense forest, with a rock overhang that formed a shallow cave. Rowan led the horses under the overhang and started unpacking supplies with quick efficiency. Evelyn slid from the saddle and immediately fell. Her legs wouldn't support her, couldn't feel them past the knees. "Damn!" Rowan caught her before she hit the ground, then half-carried her to a flat spot near the rock wall. "Should have stopped sooner. You're half frozen." "I'm fine," she said through chattering teeth. "You're hypothermic. Don't move." He disappeared and returned with a bedroll, wrapped her in it like she was something fragile, then started building a small fire using deadwood he pulled from under the overhang where it had stayed dry. Within minutes, flames were crackling, throwing blessed heat. Evelyn huddled close to it, shaking so hard her bones hurt. Rowan knelt beside her and started unlacing her boots. She tried to protest, but he ignored her, peeling off wet leather and wool socks to examine her feet. His hands were careful, professional, nothing improper about it despite the intimacy. "No frostbite," he said. "Lucky, but we need to warm you up slow or you'll go into shock." He rubbed her feet between his palms, the friction painful and wonderful at once. Feeling returned in burning needles. Evelyn gasped, and he kept going, methodical and patient. "Better? Hurts. Good. Pain means blood flow." He grabbed dry socks from his pack and put them on her feet, then wrapped her in a second blanket. "Drink this." He handed her a tin cup filled with something that smelled medicinal. She drank without asking what it was. Whiskey, she realized. Cheap and strong and exactly what she needed. The warmth spread through her chest, chasing away some of the cold. "Thank you," she managed. Rowan sat back on his heels, studying her. "You did well tonight, better than most would have. I almost fell off my horse." "Almost isn't the same as did. And you kept riding when plenty of people would have quit." He poured himself coffee from a pot he'd set near the fire. "That takes spine." Evelyn looked at him properly for the first time since they'd fled. He was exhausted, she realized. Dark circles under his eyes, lines of tension around his mouth. He'd been awake all night keeping them alive while she'd focused on just staying in the saddle. "How long have you been planning this?" she asked. "Since I got Thomas's letter. About 2 weeks." 2 weeks? You've been watching me for 2 weeks? Watching the situation. Making sure I understood what we were up against. He drank his coffee black and bitter. "Silas has more reach than I expected. The sheriff, the judge, half the business owners in Red Hollow, they're all connected to him somehow. Money, favors, fear. He's built himself a little kingdom. So why help me? You don't know me. You barely knew Thomas." Rowan was quiet for a long time, staring into the fire. "I told you about the woman who died," he said finally. "What I didn't tell you was that I loved her, or thought I did. Maybe it was just guilt dressed up as something better." He set down his cup. "Her name was Sarah. She was married to a rancher outside of Cheyenne, man named Cole, who beat her when he drank and drank most days. I met her in town one afternoon, saw the bruises she tried to hide, started paying attention." He stopped, and Evelyn waited. "She asked me to take her away. Said she'd leave everything, start over, just needed someone to help her get clear. And I said no." His voice went flat. "Told her it wasn't my place to interfere in a marriage, that she'd made her vows and had to live with them. All the things cowards say when they're too scared to do the right thing. You weren't responsible for what her husband did. I was responsible for what I didn't do." He looked at her then, and his eyes were haunted. 2 weeks later, she was dead. Cole said she'd fallen in the river washing clothes. Nobody questioned it. Nobody cared enough to look close. "But you looked." "I looked, found the bruises around her throat that didn't come from falling, found her clothes neatly folded on the bank, like she'd undressed herself before drowning, found witnesses who'd heard them fighting that morning." He smiled, bitter. "And I couldn't prove a damn thing. Cole had friends, had money, had the right last name. And Sarah was just another woman who'd made the mistake of marrying wrong." "What happened to him?" "He died 6 months later, barn fire. Very tragic." Rowan's expression didn't change. "These things happen." Evelyn understood what he wasn't saying. "You killed him." "I made sure justice happened when the law wouldn't." He met her eyes. "But it didn't bring her back. Didn't change the fact that I could have saved her and chose not to. So now when I see a woman trapped, I don't say no. I don't look away. I don't make the same mistake twice." The fire crackled between them. "I'm not her," Evelyn said quietly. "No, you're not. You're alive, and you chose to run, and that's all that matters. But you're still trying to save her. Through me." Rowan considered that. "Maybe. Or maybe I'm just trying to live with myself. Does it matter?" "I suppose not." Evelyn pulled the blanket tighter. "As long as you don't expect me to fill some hole she left behind." "I don't. I expect you to survive. Everything else is your choice." They sat in silence while the fire burned down and daylight slowly filled the clearing. Somewhere in the distance, birds started calling. The forest woke around them, indifferent to their drama. Evelyn's exhaustion was bone deep, but her mind kept racing. They'd escaped Red Hollow. They'd evaded the search party. But this was only the first night of what would be weeks, maybe months of running, and they'd barely started. "How far to the territorial line?" she asked. "3 more days like last night. Maybe 4 if the weather turns." Rowan stirred the fire. "After that, we angle southwest toward the railroad. There's a town called Silver Creek with a station that runs through to Salt Lake. From there, we can catch a line west to California." California. She'd never been farther west than Montana. Never imagined going. "And then what?" "Then you disappear. New name, new life. Use the money Thomas left you to start over." "What about you?" "I'll make sure you get settled. After that," he shrugged, "I'll figure it out." "You're just going to walk away." "That's what drifters do." Evelyn studied his face, trying to read what he wasn't saying. "You don't have to." "Don't I?" "No, you could—" She stopped, unsure what she was offering. "You could stay. Help me build whatever comes next." "Evelyn." His voice was gentle. "You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. And once we're clear of Silas, you'll realize you don't need me." "Maybe I don't need you, but maybe I want—" She cut herself off, embarrassed. "Never mind. You're right. I'm just tired and scared and not thinking clearly. Get some sleep." He stood and moved to check the horses. "I'll keep watch. We'll move again at dusk." She wanted to argue, to push back against his assumptions and her own confused feelings. But exhaustion won. She lay down under the blankets, curled close to the dying fire, and fell into dreamless sleep. When she woke, the sun was high and Rowan was cleaning his rifle with the focused attention of a man who'd done it 1,000 times. He'd set out dried meat and hardtack for her, along with more coffee. Evelyn ate mechanically, her body demanding fuel, even though she wasn't hungry. "They'll be looking for us," she said. "Already are. I heard riders pass about 2 hours ago, headed west. They think we're making for the mining camps." "We're not?" "No, mining camps are where people look for people. We're going where there's nothing but trees and rocks and cold." He reassembled the rifle with practiced ease. "It'll be harder, but safer." "How long have you been doing this? Running from things?" "Long enough to know how." He didn't look at her. "My father was a gambler. Good one, too, until he wasn't. When I was 15, he bet money he didn't have and lost to men who didn't forgive debts. We ran." "Did they catch you?" "They caught him. I kept running. Matter of fact, no self-pity. Learn to live light. Trust nobody. Keep moving. It's kept me alive this long." "Sounds lonely." "It is." He finally met her eyes. "But lonely's better than dead." They rested until evening, speaking little, each lost in their own thoughts. When the sun started dropping, Rowan saddled the horses and scattered the fire pit, erasing evidence they'd been there. As they prepared to leave, Evelyn looked back at the clearing that had sheltered them. "I'll never see Montana again, will I?" she said. Rowan checked the cinch on his saddle. "Probably not. Good." She mounted the mare, feeling stronger than she had that morning. "I hope it snows for a month straight. I hope Silas loses everything. I hope Red Hollow burns to the ground." "That's the spirit." There was approval in his voice. "Anger's better than fear. Anger keeps you moving." They rode into the deepening twilight, heading higher into the mountains where the air was thin and cold and clean. Behind them, search parties scoured the lower elevations. Ahead, somewhere beyond the peaks, lay a future Evelyn couldn't yet imagine. But for the first time since Thomas died, she felt something other than trapped. She felt dangerous. The second night was worse than the first. They climbed trails barely wide enough for the horses, following routes Rowan seemed to know by instinct or memory. The temperature dropped until Evelyn's breath came in white clouds. Her hands went numb even inside her gloves. Around midnight, it started to snow. "Keep moving," Rowan called back to her. "Don't stop. If you stop, you freeze." So she didn't stop, just hunched in the saddle and let the mare pick her way through increasing drifts, while snow gathered on her shoulders and hat. The world reduced to white darkness and the sound of her own breathing. Sometime before dawn, they reached a line shack, a tiny cabin hunters used during elk season. Rowan forced the door open and got them inside, then spent an hour getting a fire going in the ancient stove while Evelyn shook so hard she couldn't help with anything. "This is bad," he said, wrapping her in every blanket they had. "We can't travel in this. Have to wait it out." "How long?" "However long it takes." He pressed a tin cup of something hot into her hands. "Drink." This time it was tea, strong and sweet. She drank it gratefully. The shack was barely bigger than a horse stall, with a single room containing a stove, a rough bunk, and a table that looked like it might collapse if you breathed on it too hard. But it was shelter, and after hours in the snow it felt like luxury. Rowan melted snow for water and made a thin soup from dried vegetables and salt pork. They ate without speaking, too cold and tired for conversation. Outside the wind howled, snow piled against the door. "What if they find us here?" Evelyn asked. "They won't. Nobody comes up this high in winter except idiots and people running for their lives." He added wood to the stove. "We're safe until the storm breaks." "And then?" "Then we keep going." He looked at her across the small space. "You holding up?" "I don't know. Ask me when I can feel my feet again." That got a slight smile from him. "Fair enough." They took turns sleeping, one person keeping the fire going while the other rested. Evelyn had the first watch. She sat by the stove and listened to Rowan's breathing even out into sleep, and thought about how strange it was to be alone with a man she barely knew in a shack in the middle of a snowstorm while half of Montana hunted her. Strange, but not frightening. Not with Rowan. She didn't know when she'd started trusting him. Maybe when he'd pulled her from the burning barn. Maybe when he'd offered her a choice instead of orders. Or maybe it was just exhaustion and desperation making her stupid. But she didn't think so. When her watch ended, she woke him with a touch to his shoulder. He came awake instantly, hand going to the rifle beside the bunk before he registered where he was. "All quiet," she said. "Still snowing." "Good. Covers our tracks." He stood and stretched, joints popping. "Get some sleep, real sleep, not that half-awake thing you've been doing." "How did you—" "I've been running scared before. I know what it looks like." He guided her to the bunk. "I've got the watch. Close your eyes." She did, and this time sleep pulled her under completely. She woke to pale afternoon light filtering through gaps in the cabin's log walls. The storm had stopped. Rowan was at the stove cooking something that smelled better than it had any right to. "Beans," he said when he saw her watching, "and the last of the bacon. We'll need to hunt soon if this keeps up." Evelyn sat up, feeling almost human for the first time in days. "How long did I sleep?" 14 hours. You needed it." 14. She scrambled off the bunk. "We should be moving. They could be doing a lot of things, but they're not finding us in 3 feet of fresh snow." He handed her a plate of food. "Eat. Then we'll talk about what comes next." What came next was harder traveling through deeper snow. They left the shack at dusk and made perhaps 5 miles before exhaustion forced them to stop again. The horses were struggling, breaking trail through drifts that sometimes came up to their chests. "We can't keep this pace," Rowan said that night as they huddled in another makeshift camp. "The horses won't make it. So what do we do?" "We rest tomorrow, let them recover, hunt for food, then push hard for the territorial line." That's another day Silas has to catch up. Silas isn't catching anyone in this snow. His men are probably turned back by now, waiting for the weather to clear. Rowan poked at their small fire. "We're ahead. As long as we don't do anything stupid, we stay ahead." So they rested. Rowan spent the morning hunting and came back with 2 rabbits. Evelyn cleaned them while he built up the fire, and they cooked meat that tasted like the best thing she'd ever eaten. "You know how to dress game," he observed. "My father was a trapper, before he died." She skewered rabbit over the fire. "I grew up in a cabin smaller than that shack we used. Didn't see a real town until I was 12. "How'd you end up in Denver?" "My mother moved us there after father died. Wanted me to have opportunities," she said. Opportunities mostly meant working in a dress shop 12 hours a day for pennies. Evelyn turned the meat. "But I learned tailoring, learned to manage money, learned that I didn't want to be poor forever." "So you married Thomas." "So I married Thomas." She met his eyes. "Which probably makes me sound like exactly what Silas thinks I am. A woman who married for money." "Did you?" "I married for the chance at something better. A ranch, a home, the possibility of building something that was mine." The rabbit fat dripped into the fire, hissing. I didn't love Thomas, but I respected him. I thought he respected me. Turned out we were both using each other for escape. From what? He was escaping Silas and his own failures. I was escaping poverty and powerlessness. She pulled the meat from the fire. We gave each other what we needed until he died. That's more than a lot of marriages have. They ate in silence. My wife died, Rowan said suddenly. I didn't mention her before because it was a long time ago. We were young. 19, both of us. She got pregnant, died in childbirth. The baby, too. Evelyn set down her food. I'm sorry. It was 15 years ago. I barely remember her face now. He stared at the fire. But I remember thinking the world had ended, that I'd never be whole again. Took me years to realize I was right. I wouldn't be whole again. But broken people can still function, still find reasons to keep going. Is that what you've been doing? Functioning? More or less. He looked at her. What about you? When Thomas died, did you grieve? Honestly, I felt relief. Followed immediately by guilt about feeling relief. Evelyn wrapped her arms around her knees. Does that make me a terrible person? Makes you human. Grief isn't simple. Neither is marriage. They finished eating and packed away supplies for the next leg of their journey. The sun was setting, painting the snow gold and pink. Tomorrow we cross into Wyoming territory, Rowan said. After that, Silas's legal authority ends. Sheriff Garrett can't touch you. The judges can't force you back. But Silas can still send men after me. He can. But it gets harder every mile we travel. Expensive, too. Eventually, the cost of chasing you will outweigh what he thinks he'll gain by catching you. Unless it's not about money for him. Rowan gave her a sharp look. What do you mean? I mean, Silas doesn't just want the ranch. He wants to win, to own things that resisted him. She thought about the way he'd touched her face, his thumb possessive on her jaw. He wanted me before Thomas died. I could see it every time he visited, and now that Thomas is gone, he thinks I should just fall into his hands like ripe fruit. Then he's going to be disappointed. Maybe. Or maybe he'll chase me across 3 territories and an ocean if that's what it takes. She met Rowan's eyes. You need to know what you're risking by helping me. Silas Mercer doesn't forgive, doesn't forget. If he finds out who you are, he'll come after you too. Let him. There was iron in Rowan's voice. I've been running from things my whole life. Might be nice to finally stand and fight. Even if it gets you killed. Especially then. At least I'd die for something that mattered. They broke camp at first light and pushed hard through the next 2 days, making better time as the snow thinned and the terrain leveled out. On the morning of the 4th day since leaving Red Hollow, they crossed an invisible line that marked the territorial boundary. Montana behind them, Wyoming ahead. Evelyn felt something loosen in her chest. Still a long way to go, Rowan warned. Don't get comfortable. But she couldn't help it. For the first time since Thomas died, the future looked like something other than a trap closing around her. They reached Silver Creek 6 days later, half frozen and completely exhausted. The town was bigger than Red Hollow, rougher, full of miners and railway workers, and the kind of people who didn't ask questions. Rowan got them rooms at a boarding house run by a woman who took one look at Evelyn's face and asked no questions beyond payment in advance. They paid for a week. Then Rowan went to scout the train station while Evelyn collapsed into the first real bed she'd slept in since leaving home. When she woke, it was dark, and Rowan was sitting by the window, watching the street. There's a train west in 3 days, he said without turning. I bought tickets under false names. We'll take it to Salt Lake, then catch another line to San Francisco. San Francisco. The name felt foreign in her mouth. Or somewhere else. Portland. Seattle. Anywhere you want that's far from here. Evelyn sat up, pushing hair from her face. What happens when we get there? You start over. I already told you. I mean, what happens with us? He finally looked at her. There is no us. There's me helping you escape and you building a new life. That's all this is. Is it? Has to be. You're running from one man who wants to own you. Last thing you need is another man getting ideas. What if I'm the one with ideas? Then wait until you are somewhere safe to think them through. He stood. You're exhausted and traumatized, and you've spent a week depending on me to keep you alive. That's not the foundation for anything real. That's just survival making you confused. He was right. She knew he was right, but she also knew she'd seen him calm under pressure, competent without being controlling, strong without being cruel. Everything Thomas wasn't. Everything Silas would never be. Fine, she said. But you're still wrong. Probably. He moved toward the door. Get some sleep. Real sleep. In a real bed. We've got 3 days to recover before the next hard part. He left her there, and Evelyn lay back down, staring at the ceiling and wondering when exactly she'd started hoping for something impossible. The 3 days in Silver Creek should have been restful. Instead, they were the longest of Evelyn's life. She spent the first day sleeping, her body finally catching up on weeks of terror and exhaustion. When she woke the second morning, Rowan was gone, and the boarding house proprietor, a stern-faced woman named Mrs. Calloway, was knocking on her door with breakfast. "Your brother said you'd been sick," Mrs. Calloway said, setting down a tray with eggs and coffee. "Said you needed building up, brother." The lie was necessary, but it still felt strange. "Thank you," Evelyn said. "He also paid extra for bath water. There's a tub in the washroom down the hall, clean towels on the shelf." The woman studied her with sharp eyes. "You running from something, girl?" Evelyn's heart kicked. "No, just... Don't bother lying. I wasn't born yesterday." Mrs. Calloway moved to the window and adjusted the curtain. "But I don't ask questions I don't want answered. You keep your business quiet, pay your rent, and we'll get along fine. Your brother seems capable enough to keep trouble from my door." "He is." "Good. Because Silver Creek's got enough trouble without importing more." She headed for the door, then paused. "There's a dress shop 2 streets over. Mrs. Chen. Tell her I sent you. She'll fix you up with something that doesn't look like you've been sleeping in the woods." After she left, Evelyn ate mechanically and then found the washroom. The bath was lukewarm but felt like heaven. She scrubbed away days of dirt and smoke and fear, watching the water turn gray. When she emerged, Rowan still hadn't returned. She found the dress shop Mrs. Calloway had mentioned, a narrow storefront wedged between a hardware store and a saloon. Inside, a Chinese woman about Evelyn's age was working at a sewing machine, fabric flowing through her hands like water. "Mrs. Calloway sent me," Evelyn said. The woman looked up, taking in Evelyn's borrowed clothes and worn appearance in a single glance. "You need something ready-made or custom?" "Ready-made. I'm traveling." "Traveling?" Mrs. Chen stood and began pulling dresses from a rack. "Where to?" "West." "West is big." She held up a dark blue wool dress. "This would suit you. Practical for train travel. Won't show every speck of dust." Evelyn bought the dress and 2 others, along with a proper coat and a hat that didn't look like it had survived a barn fire. Mrs. Chen threw in a pair of gloves without being asked. "You take care," she said as Evelyn paid. "Woman traveling alone, people make assumptions." "I'm not alone, She caught herself. "My brother's with me." "Good. Men are useful for keeping other men at a distance." Mrs. Chen's smile was knowing. "Even when they're not actually your brother." Evelyn left before she could respond to that. She spent the rest of the afternoon exploring Silver Creek, staying to the main streets where people wouldn't notice one more woman running errands. The town was busy, full of miners coming down from the hills and railway workers between shifts. Nobody paid her much attention. It was almost sunset when she saw the poster. It was nailed to a wall outside the telegraph office, fresh ink still wet, a crude drawing of a woman's face, not quite accurate but close enough to make Evelyn's blood freeze. Wanted for theft and fraud. Evelyn Mercer, also known as Evelyn Clark, age 26, brown hair, blue eyes, last seen in Red Hollow, Montana. Reward: $1,000 for information leading to capture. Contact Silas Mercer or Sheriff Garrett, Red Hollow. Her hands went numb. $1,000. That was enough money to make even honest people consider betrayal. She forced herself to walk past the poster casually, as if she hadn't seen it, turned the corner and kept walking until she reached the boarding house, climbed the stairs with her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. Rowan was in her room when she opened the door. "I saw it," he said before she could speak. "They're all over town, posted this morning. $1,000. She closed the door and leaned against it. "That's enough to make us vulnerable, but not enough to make us caught." He was packing their supplies into saddlebags with quick efficiency. "We leave tonight. Can't wait for the train. But you bought tickets. You said... I said a lot of things before Silas proved he's more determined than I gave him credit for. Rowan straightened, meeting her eyes. Train station will be watched. Sheriff here might not be on Silas's payroll, but $1,000 changes math fast. We go overland to where? South to the railroad line, then west following the tracks. It's longer, harder, but keeps us away from stations and towns where someone might recognize you. Evelyn moved to the window and looked down at the street. Normal people going about normal business. Any one of them could be studying wanted posters right now, memorizing her face. How did he do it so fast? She asked. We've only been gone 10 days. Telegraph. Silas sent descriptions and offers to every sheriff and marshal within 500 miles. Probably spent more on those messages than most people see in a year. Rowan's voice was grim. He's serious about getting you back. This isn't about the ranch anymore, is it? I don't think it ever was. She turned to face him. Then what is it about? Control. Pride. The fact that you're the first thing that's ever slipped through his fingers. Rowan checked his rifle, then holstered his pistol. Men like Silas don't accept losing. It breaks something in their understanding of the world. So he'll chase me forever. Until he catches you or until you disappear so completely, he has to accept you're gone. He shouldered the saddlebags. We're aiming for the second option. They left Silver Creek 2 hours after full dark, walking the horses quietly through back alleys until they were clear of town. Evelyn wore her new dark dress and kept her head down, playing the part of a modest woman accompanying her husband home from evening church services. Once they reached open country, they mounted and rode hard. The land here was different from Montana, flatter, more desolate, with long stretches of nothing between isolated ranches. They avoided the main roads, cutting across open prairie where their tracks would be harder to follow. 3 days out of Silver Creek, they hit their first real problem. They'd been following a creek bed south, letting the horses drink, when Rowan suddenly reined in and held up a hand for silence. Evelyn stopped beside him, straining to hear whatever had alerted him. Voices. Male. Rough. Getting closer. Rowan pointed to a stand of cottonwood trees 50 yards away. They made it there just as 3 riders appeared from the opposite direction, moving slow and purposeful along the creek. Bounty hunters. Had to be. They had that careful, searching look of men tracking something valuable. Evelyn and Rowan pressed deep into the trees, hands over the horses' noses to keep them quiet. The riders stopped maybe 30 feet away. Lost the trail back at the fork, one said. He was big, bearded, wearing a cattleman's coat that had seen better years. Could have gone east or south. South makes more sense. This from a younger man, lean and nervous. Railroad south. Woman like that, city-bred, she'll head for civilization. The third rider hadn't spoken yet. He sat his horse like he'd been born in the saddle, scanning the terrain with patient attention. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet and far more dangerous than the others. She's got help. Man named Cade, according to the reports. Ex-cavalry, good with a rifle, knows the territory. He turned his horse in a slow circle. They won't take the easy route. Too smart for that. Evelyn felt Rowan go tense beside her. You know him? The bearded man asked. Knew of him. Rode with his brother once. Sam Cade. The quiet man's mouth twitched. Sam died badly. Rowan's been drifting ever since, doing odd jobs, helping people who probably don't deserve it. He's got a weakness for lost causes. Then he's made a mistake helping this one. The bearded man spat into the creek. $1,000 is more money than most men see in a lifetime. And Mercer's paying extra for the man who brings her back. Says he doesn't care about condition as long as she's breathing. The younger rider shifted uncomfortably. That's cold. That's business. The quiet man gathered his reins. Split up. Baker, you take the East Fork. Jensen, head south to the next town and watch the train station. I'll circle west and pick up their trail where it crosses the staging road. What if they're not heading for the railroad at all? Jensen asked. Then we've wasted time and Mercer's money. But I don't think so. Woman's running scared. Scared people run toward what they know, and city women know trains and hotels and places with laws. He kicked his horse into motion. Check back in 3 days at the Carson Creek way station. If nobody's found sign by then, we expand the search grid. They separated, each rider heading a different direction. Evelyn and Rowan waited a full hour before moving, making sure the hunters were truly gone. When they finally emerged from the trees, the sun was setting and the prairie stretched empty in all directions. "They know your name," Evelyn said quietly. "Doesn't matter. They know your brother died. They know you help people. Still doesn't matter." But his jaw was tight and he wouldn't look at her. "Rowan, we need to change direction. They're watching the railroad now, which means we can't use it." He studied the darkening sky. "West to the mountains. There are mining camps in the high country, places where people don't ask questions. We can hole up until things cool down. And if they don't cool down, then we keep moving until they do." They rode through the night, pushing the horses harder than was wise. Evelyn could feel her mare tiring beneath her, stumbling occasionally on ground she would have navigated easily when fresh. But they couldn't stop, not with bounty hunters spreading across the territory like a net. Just before dawn, the mare went lame. Evelyn felt it happen, a hitch in the animal's gait, a favoring of the front left leg that got worse with every step. She dismounted immediately and ran her hands down the leg, feeling for heat or swelling. "Stone bruise," she said. "Maybe worse. She needs rest." Rowan cursed softly. "How long?" "Days, maybe a week." Evelyn straightened, looking at the endless prairie around them. "We can't wait that long." "No." He was already thinking, calculating. "You take my horse, I'll walk." "That's ridiculous. You can't." "I can and I will. Your mare can follow unburdened. We make for those hills." He pointed to a dark smudge on the western horizon. "There's an old trading post at the base. Friend of mine runs it. We can get a fresh horse there." "A friend?" Evelyn heard the skepticism in her own voice. "Like the friends who loaned us horses in Montana?" "Exactly like that. People who owe me favors or who I've helped when they needed it." He handed her his reins. "Now get on before I change my mind and we both walk." She mounted his buckskin, feeling guilty about the struggling mare, but knowing Rowan was right. They were still too exposed, too easy to track. Sentiment was a luxury they couldn't afford. They reached the hills 2 days later, Rowan walking the entire distance without complaint. The trading post was exactly as advertised, a weathered building clinging to the side of a rocky slope, with a corral and a hand-painted sign that read, "McCready's Trading Post and Saloon." The man who emerged as they approached was ancient, weathered, brown as old leather, with eyes that had seen everything twice and weren't impressed either time. "Rowan Cade." His voice was gravel and whiskey. "Heard you were dead." "Not yet, McCready." "Shame. Was hoping to buy your rifle off whoever killed you." The old man's gaze shifted to Evelyn. "And who's this?" "Someone who needs help." "Don't they always?" McCready spat tobacco juice into the dust. "You got money?" Rowan pulled out a roll of bills. "Not much, but enough." "We need a horse. Good one. Trail sound." "I got a horse. Cost you double what it's worth because you're desperate and I'm a bastard." "Fair enough." McCready led them to the corral where a sturdy roan gelding stood, looking bored. "He's mean, he's stubborn, and he'll buck if you're stupid, but he'll go all day and all night without quitting." "Sold." Rowan counted out bills while McCready saddled the horse with movements that belied his age. "You two got law trouble?" the old man asked casually. "Worse, money trouble." "Mercer money?" When Rowan's expression flickered, McCready laughed. "Saw the posters? Whole territory's seen them by now. $1,000 for a pretty lady who supposedly stole from the Mercer estate." He handed Rowan the reins. "Except I knew Thomas Mercer, and I knew his brother, and I know which one's the thief in that family." Evelyn found her voice. "You knew Thomas?" "Knew him well enough to know he married above himself. Knew him well enough to buy him drinks when Silas had him scared and drinking." McCready studied her with those ancient eyes. "He talked about you near the end. Said he'd found a decent woman and didn't deserve her. Said his brother would take you the minute he died, and there wasn't nothing Thomas could do to stop it except leave you money to run." Her throat tightened. "He told you that?" "Told me a lot of things. Drunk men do." The old man moved toward the trading post. "Come inside. You look half-starved, both of you." They followed him into a dim interior that smelled of tobacco and old wood. McCready poured them coffee and set out bread and preserved meat without being asked. How far behind are the hunters? He asked. 3 days? Maybe 4, Rowan said. We've been dodging them since Silver Creek. They'll come through here eventually, always do. McCready pulled out a map and spread it on the counter. Your best route's west through the pass, then south to the border. Cross into Colorado and you're outside Montana jurisdiction. Most bounty hunters won't follow past the territorial line unless the money's exceptional. It's exceptional, Evelyn said quietly. Then you've got problems. He traced a route on the map with one gnarled finger. Alternative is northwest to the Badlands. Rough country, no water, hot as hell even this time of year, but nobody goes there unless they're hiding from something worse than death. Rowan studied the map. How long to the Badlands? Week of hard riding, maybe more if you're careful. McCready rolled up the map and handed it to him. Take it. I got others. Why are you helping us? Evelyn asked. Because Thomas Mercer was a weak fool, but he wasn't cruel. And because Silas Mercer is a bastard who's had things his way too long. The old man refilled their coffee. Also because I like seeing powerful men lose. Gives me hope for the world. They stayed at McCready's that night, sleeping in a back room that might have been a storage closet. In the morning, they left with the new horse, fresh supplies, and McCready's map tucked in Rowan's saddlebag. Stay off the main trails, the old man advised as they mounted. And if you see dust rising behind you, assume the worst and ride like hell. Always do, Rowan said. They headed northwest towards country that looked like the surface of the moon, all rock and scrub and merciless sun. The temperature climbed as they descended from the hills, and soon Evelyn was sweating through her dress despite the dry air. This is what hell looks like, she said around midday. Hell's got better water. Rowan passed her his canteen. Drink slow. We need to make this last until we find the next spring. They found it 3 days later, a muddy seep that barely qualified as water. But it was wet and they were desperate, so they drank it filtered through cloth and tried not to think about what might be making it taste like metal and regret. That night, Evelyn woke to the sound of Rowan vomiting outside their camp. She found him doubled over in the darkness, shaking. Bad water? Probably. He wiped his mouth. I'll be fine. He wasn't fine. By morning, he had a fever and could barely stay in the saddle. Evelyn made him ride while she walked, leading both horses through terrain that seemed designed specifically to kill travelers. Need to stop, Rowan mumbled around noon. Can't. He slid from the saddle before she could catch him, hitting the ground hard. Evelyn knelt beside him, feeling his forehead, burning hot. His skin was gray, lips cracked and bleeding. Whatever was in that water had hit him harder than it had hit her. She got him into shade, a narrow overhang of rock that provided maybe 6 feet of protection from the sun. Forced water into him despite his protests. Bathed his face and neck with a wet cloth. Leave me, he said at one point, words slurred. Take the horses. Get clear. Not happening. Evelyn, I said not happening. You saved me from a burning barn and a forced marriage and a life I didn't want. I'm not leaving you in the Badlands to die of bad water. He tried to argue but didn't have the strength. Just closed his eyes and let her tend to him. She stayed awake all night, keeping watch and monitoring his fever. Sometime before dawn, it broke. He slept deeply, breathing easier, and Evelyn finally let herself sleep too. When she woke, the sun was high and Rowan was sitting up, looking weak but conscious. You're still here, he said. Where else would I be? Halfway to Colorado if you were smart. Lucky for you, I'm apparently not smart. She handed him water. Drink, slowly. He obeyed, studying her over the rim of the canteen. You could have left, probably should have, and abandoned the only person in 3 territories who knows where we're going. That would be stupid, even for me. She started packing their supplies. Can you ride? If I have to. You have to. We've been here too long. If those hunters picked up our trail, they didn't. Nobody's that good. But he struggled to his feet, swaying slightly. Give me an hour. I'll be ready. They left at dusk, Rowan insisting he was fine despite clearly being anything but. They made poor time, stopping frequently so he could rest. Evelyn watched him constantly, terrified he'd fall from the saddle again. On the 3rd day after his fever broke, they finally cleared the Badlands. The change was dramatic. One moment, endless rock and heat. The next, pine trees and actual grass. A stream ran clear and cold, and Evelyn could have wept at the sight of it. They made camp, and Rowan slept for 16 hours straight while Evelyn kept watch. When he finally woke, his color was better and his eyes were clear. "How long was I out?" "Long enough." "You needed it?" She handed him food, dried meat and hardtack, nothing fancy, but he ate like it was a feast. "We're almost to the Colorado line. McCready's map shows a town called Redemption about 2 days south. We can resupply there." "Redemption." He smiled slightly. "That's optimistic. Maybe we've earned some optimism." "Maybe." He finished eating and stood testing his legs. "I'll take first watch tonight. You've been carrying us for days. Time I return the favor." That night they sat together by a small fire, not speaking, just existing in the quiet. The stars overhead were so bright they seemed close enough to touch. "Can I ask you something?" Evelyn said finally. "You can ask." "That man who was hunting us, the quiet one, he mentioned your brother, Sam." Rowan's expression closed. "He did." "What happened to him?" For a long time she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he spoke, voice flat and distant. "Sam was older than me by 3 years, raised me after our father died. He was good, genuinely good, not just decent. Became a lawman in Wyoming, trying to make things better." He poked at the fire. "He arrested a man named Cullen for cattle rustling. Had proof, witnesses, everything. But Cullen had money and connections. Judge let him walk." He paused, and Evelyn waited. 2 weeks later, Sam was found in an alley with his throat cut. The sheriff called it robbery, even though his wallet was still in his pocket, even though everyone knew who did it. Cullen's men, probably on his orders. Rowan's hands were steady, but his voice carried something dark and old. "I was 22, thought I could get justice through the law like Sam would have wanted. Spent 6 months collecting evidence, making a case. Took it to the territorial marshal." "What happened?" "Marshal thanked me for my time and told me to go home. Said the case was weak, wouldn't stand up in court." His smile was bitter. "Found out later he was taking money from Cullen, too. Whole system was rotten." "So you killed him?" "It wasn't a question. So I made sure justice happened. Then I left Wyoming and never went back." He met her eyes. "That's who I am, Evelyn. Not a hero, not a good man. Just someone who learned the law doesn't protect people like us, so we have to protect ourselves." "I don't think that makes you bad." "Maybe not, but it makes me dangerous to be around. I'm already running from men who want to kidnap me and force me into marriage. I think I can handle a little danger." That got an actual smile from him. "Fair point." They reached Redemption 2 days later, and it was exactly what its name suggested, a town where people went to start over. The sheriff barely glanced at them. The hotel clerk didn't ask questions. The general store owner sold them supplies without commentary. It was perfect. They took rooms at the hotel, separate this time, maintaining the fiction of siblings, and for the first time in weeks, Evelyn felt safe enough to breathe. That lasted exactly 3 hours. She was coming back from the bathhouse, clean and feeling almost human, when she saw him. A man standing across the street, watching the hotel. He was tall, dressed like a ranch hand, but there was something about the way he stood that screamed wrong. Evelyn ducked into an alley and circled back through the rear entrance, taking stairs 2 at a time to Rowan's room. He opened the door with his pistol drawn, saw her face, and immediately went on alert. "What happened?" "Someone's watching the hotel. Man across the street. He's not from town." Rowan moved to the window, staying back from the glass. "Describe him." She did, and watched his jaw tighten. "Jensen, the young one from the creek." He grabbed his saddlebags. "They found us." "How?" "We've been so careful." "Oh, doesn't matter how. Matters that we leave now." He was already packing, movements quick and efficient. "Get your things. We meet at the stable in 5 minutes." Evelyn ran to her room, threw everything into her bag, and made it to the stable in 4. Rowan was there, saddling horses with hands that didn't shake despite the urgency. "Where do we go?" she asked. "South, fast. We hit the border and we don't stop until—" "You folks in a hurry?" They both spun. Jensen stood in the stable doorway, blocking the exit. He didn't have his gun drawn, but his hand rested near it. "Just eager to get moving," Rowan said casually. "Early start makes for an easy day." "That's funny. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're running. Jensen's eyes flicked to Evelyn. You match the description on those wanted posters. Same height, same coloring, even got the same nervous look. You've got the wrong person, Evelyn said. Maybe, but $1,000 says I should check to be sure. He pulled out the poster, unfolded it slowly. Says here you stole from the Mercer estate, that you're dangerous and unbalanced. Says the man with you is armed and should be considered hostile. And which part do you believe? Rowan asked. Jensen studied them. Honestly, none of it. I've been doing this work long enough to know when a wanted poster's telling the truth and when it's telling a story someone paid for. He refolded the paper. But I also know $1,000 is $1,000, and I got debts to pay. Everyone's got debts, Rowan said quietly. Question is whether you're willing to live with how you pay them. Pretty words, but they don't feed my family or keep the bank from taking my land. No, they don't. Rowan's hand moved slightly toward his rifle. But shooting an unarmed woman and dragging her back to a man who wants to force her into marriage? That's something you'll carry the rest of your life. You think $1,000 is worth that weight? Jensen's expression flickered. You don't know what you're talking about. I know exactly what I'm talking about. I know you're young and desperate and probably a decent man pushed into a bad corner. I know because I've been there. Rowan took a step forward. But I also know that if you try to take her, I will put you down. And then your family gets nothing, and you die in a stable in Colorado for Silas Mercer's pride. The tension stretched so tight, Evelyn could barely breathe. Then Jensen's shoulders sagged. Get out of here, both of you. And if anyone asks, I never saw you. Why? Evelyn found her voice. Because he's right. I'm not this desperate yet. Jensen backed toward the door. But my partners are. They'll be here by tomorrow, so unless you want to test whether Baker and Hart have consciences, you better ride now and ride hard. They didn't wait for him to change his mind. Mounted and rode out the back way, while Jensen stood in the stable doorway, watching them go. A mile outside town, Evelyn finally spoke. He let us go. He did. Do you think the others will too? No. Rowan's voice was flat. Jensen was young enough to still have doubts. The others won't. They rode through the night and into the next day, pushing deeper into Colorado. The land here was different, higher, drier, full of red rock formations that looked like ancient monuments. On the second day, they spotted dust rising behind them. How many? Evelyn asked. Rowan studied the horizon. At least 3, maybe more. Can we outrun them? No, horses are tired. We're tired. He scanned the landscape, then pointed to a narrow canyon cutting through the rock. But we can make them work for it. They rode into the canyon, and Rowan immediately started looking for defensible positions. He found one about halfway through, a place where the walls narrowed and a fallen boulder provided cover. You keep going, he said, dismounting. I'll slow them down. Absolutely not. Evelyn, no. She dismounted too. We're in this together. I'm not leaving you to fight alone. He looked at her for a long moment, something complex moving behind his eyes. Then he nodded and started distributing ammunition. You know how to shoot? My father taught me. Good, because in about 10 minutes you're going to need to prove it. The riders appeared at the canyon mouth exactly when Rowan predicted. 3 of them, Baker, Hart, and a third man Evelyn didn't recognize. They spread out, approaching carefully. Cade? Baker's voice echoed off the rock walls. We know you're in there. Just send out the woman and we'll let you ride free. That's not happening, Rowan called back. Then you're a fool. There's 3 of us and 2 of you, and we've got time and water on our side. You've also got a narrow canyon and bad cover. First man through this gap gets shot. You want to volunteer? Silence. The hunters were calculating, weighing odds. Then gunfire erupted. Evelyn pressed herself behind the boulder as bullets ricocheted off rock, sending chips flying. Rowan returned fire with careful precision, making every shot count. There. He pointed to movement on the left wall. Someone's trying to flank us. Evelyn swung her rifle up and fired. The figure ducked back, but she'd made her point. They were defended on both sides. The fight lasted maybe 10 minutes, but it felt like hours. Bullets whined overhead. Rock exploded in sharp fragments. The smell of gunpowder filled the narrow space. Then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. Cade, Baker again. You winged heart. This is getting expensive. Should have thought about that before you started shooting. Just give us the woman. Mercer doesn't care what condition you're in, but he wants her alive. Don't make this harder than it has to be. Rowan looked at Evelyn. She looked back, seeing the calculation in his eyes. He was thinking about surrendering, about trading himself for her freedom. Don't you dare, she said quietly. Evelyn, I mean it, Rowan. Don't you dare play hero and get yourself killed thinking it'll save me, because all it'll do is leave me alone with 3 men who definitely won't let me go, and I'll have to live knowing you died for nothing. His jaw worked. There might not be another way out. Then we find one together, or we go down together, but we don't give up. Before he could respond, a new sound cut through the canyon. Hoofbeats, lots of them, coming fast from the opposite direction. The hunters heard it too. Baker swore viciously. Who the hell is that? 8 riders emerged from the far end of the canyon riding hard. They weren't Law. Evelyn could tell that immediately from their mismatched clothes and the casual way they carried weapons. But they rode with purpose, and when they saw the standoff, they spread out in a line that blocked the hunters' escape route. The lead rider was a woman, middle-aged and hard-faced, with gray streaking her dark hair. She surveyed the scene with the air of someone who'd seen worse and wasn't impressed. Well now, she called out. Looks like we've interrupted something. Baker raised his rifle. This isn't your business, lady. Ride on. Funny thing about business, we're making it our business. The woman's smile was sharp. You boys are a long way from Montana, and from what I hear, you're chasing a woman who doesn't want to be caught. That strikes me as unfriendly behavior. There's a reward. Don't care about your reward. Care about keeping Colorado free of Montana trash. She gestured to her riders. Now, you've got about 10 seconds to mount up and head back north before we decide you're trespassing on range we protect. Who the hell are you? Name's Catherine Reeves. I run cattle and I run off people who cause problems in my territory. And right now, you're a problem. The hunters looked at each other, clearly calculating. 3 of them against 8 armed riders were bad odds, especially with Rowan and Evelyn at their backs. Baker lowered his rifle. This isn't over. It is for today. Catherine's voice went cold. Now get moving before I change my mind about letting you leave intact. They left, riding hard for the canyon mouth and disappearing into the distance. Catherine watched them go, then turned her attention to Rowan and Evelyn. You 2 can come out now. We're not going to shoot you. Rowan emerged first, rifle ready but not aimed. Evelyn followed, trying to look less terrified than she felt. Thank you, Rowan said. We were in a bad spot. I could see that. Catherine dismounted, studying them both. You're the ones from the wanted posters. Evelyn Mercer and Rowan Cade. How did you... I make it my business to know who's traveling through my territory and why, especially when they're being chased by men with guns. She pulled out a canteen and offered it to Evelyn. Drink. You look like you need it. Evelyn drank gratefully. Why did you help us? Because I knew Thomas Mercer, and I know his bastard brother, and because any woman running from Silas Mercer has my sympathy and my support. Catherine took back the canteen. Also because I don't like bounty hunters operating in my territory without permission. Your territory? Rowan's tone was careful. I own 30,000 acres north of here, run 2,000 head of cattle, employ 40 ranch hands. When I say this is my territory, I mean it literally. She gestured to her riders. These are some of my people. We patrol regularly, keep an eye on who's coming and going. And you just happened to be here? Nothing just happened about it? One of my hands saw those hunters in Redemption, recognized them from descriptions I'd circulated. We've been tracking them since yesterday, waiting to see what they do. Catherine's expression hardened. I don't like men who hunt women for money. Reminds me too much of other ugly chapters in history. Evelyn felt something loosen in her chest. What do we owe you? Nothing. Consider it a favor to Thomas's memory. Catherine remounted. But I suggest you keep moving. Those 3 will report back to whoever's coordinating the search. More will come, and I can't be everywhere at once. Where should we go? Evelyn asked. West. Keep heading west until you hit the Pacific. California is big enough to lose yourself in, and far enough from Montana that Silas's reach will thin to nothing. She gathered her reins. There's a ranch about 20 miles south run by a man named Morrison. Tell him Catherine sent you. He'll give you fresh horses and supplies, no questions asked. Why are you doing this? Rowan asked. Catherine looked at him for a long moment. Because 20 years ago, I was running from a man who thought he owned me, and someone helped me when they didn't have to. I've been paying that forward ever since. She turned her horse. Good luck. You're going to need it. She and her riders disappeared the way they'd come, leaving Rowan and Evelyn alone in the canyon with the late afternoon sun turning the red rocks gold. We keep finding the right people, Evelyn said quietly. Or maybe we're just lucky. Rowan started checking the horses. Either way, she's right. We need to keep moving. They found Morrison's ranch as the sun set, a sprawling operation that looked prosperous and well-maintained. Morrison himself was a grizzled man who asked exactly 0 questions when they mentioned Catherine's name, just provided fresh horses and enough supplies to reach the next town. She said, "West, you go west," he advised. Catherine's got good instincts about these things. They rode out at dawn, 2 people on good horses with enough provisions to make a real push toward California. The morning was clear and cool, and for the first time in weeks, Evelyn let herself think about the future instead of just surviving the present. What will you do? She asked Rowan as they rode. After you get me to California. Haven't thought that far ahead. Liar. You think 10 steps ahead about everything. He smiled slightly. Maybe I don't want to think about it. Why not? Because thinking about it means acknowledging this has an ending, and I'm not ready for that yet. Evelyn's heart did something complicated in her chest. Rowan, don't. His voice was gentle but firm. Don't say anything we can't take back. Not yet. Not until you're somewhere safe and you've had time to think without fear clouding everything. What if fear isn't clouding anything? What if I know exactly what I want? Then you can tell me in California. When we're not running. When there's time to mean it. He looked at her, and his expression was open in a way she'd never seen before. I need you to be sure, Evelyn. Because once we cross that line, I won't be able to walk away. And you deserve better than someone who can't give you a choice. She wanted to argue, wanted to tell him she was already sure, that she'd been sure since he'd walked into her burning barn or since he'd sat with her through a fevered night in the Badlands. But maybe he was right. Maybe they both needed distance from desperation before they could trust what they felt. California, then, she said. California, he agreed. They rode west into the rising sun toward a future neither of them could quite imagine, but both were determined to reach. They made it 300 miles before Silas caught up to them. It happened in a town called Mineral Springs, a dusty collection of buildings clinging to the edge of nowhere. They'd stopped for supplies, thinking they were far enough west to breathe easier, thinking distance had finally bought them safety. Evelyn was in the general store, examining fabric she couldn't afford but wanted to touch anyway, when she heard the commotion outside. Shouting, horses, the sharp sound of someone giving orders in a voice that expected obedience. She moved to the window and felt the world tilt sideways. Silas Mercer sat astride a black stallion in the middle of the street, surrounded by 8 armed men. He looked exactly as she remembered, big, confident, radiating the kind of power that came from never being told no. But there was something different about him now, something harder around the eyes, meaner in the set of his mouth. He'd been chasing her for 6 weeks. It had changed him. You. He pointed at a man sweeping the boardwalk outside the saloon. I'm looking for a woman, brown hair, blue eyes, traveling with a man. Seen anyone like that? The sweeper shook his head quickly. No, sir, haven't seen nobody like that. Silas's smile was cold. Funny, because my sources say they came through here yesterday, bought supplies at the general store. His gaze swept the street, and Evelyn ducked back from the window, heart hammering. So either my sources are wrong, or you're lying to protect strangers. Which is it? I don't know nothing about, The crack of a gunshot made Evelyn flinch. When she looked again, the sweeper was on the ground, clutching his leg and screaming. Silas holstered his pistol with casual indifference. Anyone else want to tell me they haven't seen anything? He called out. Silence. The kind of silence that came when people realized they were dealing with someone who'd crossed a line most men wouldn't. The store owner, a nervous man named Fletcher, grabbed Evelyn's arm. Back door, now, before he sees you. But now. Fletcher pushed her toward the rear of the store. I got a wife and kids. I can't have this kind of trouble. Evelyn ran. She burst out the back door into an alley looking for Rowan. He'd been checking the horses at the livery 2 streets over. If she could reach him, if they could get to the horses before Silas secured the town. Going somewhere? She spun. One of Silas's men blocked the alley, rifle pointed casually in her direction. He was young, maybe 25, with the kind of face that would have been handsome if not for the cruelty in his eyes. "Step aside," Evelyn said, trying to sound braver than she felt. "I don't think so. Boss has been looking for you a long time, spent a lot of money, killed at least 2 men who got between him and finding you." The man gestured with his rifle. "You're going to walk back around front nice and calm, and you're going to do whatever Mr. Mercer tells you. Understand?" "No. That wasn't a question." "I don't care." Evelyn's hands were shaking, but her voice stayed steady. "I'm not going anywhere with Silas Mercer. You'll have to shoot me first." The man's expression flickered. Surprise. Maybe even respect. "Lady, I don't want to shoot you, but I will if you make me. Now move." She was trying to figure out whether he meant it when a shadow dropped from the roof above. Rowan landed behind the gunman, knife already drawn. There was a brief struggle, a grunt of pain, and the man collapsed. Rowan grabbed Evelyn's hand. "Run!" They ran. Behind them, someone shouted. More voices joined in. Boots pounded on hard-packed dirt. A gunshot cracked overhead, and Evelyn felt the air move as the bullet passed too close. "The livery!" Rowan pulled her around a corner. "Get the horses!" But when they reached the stable, another of Silas's men was waiting. This one didn't hesitate, just raised his rifle and fired. Rowan shoved Evelyn sideways as the bullet took a chunk out of the doorframe where she'd been standing. Rowan's pistol cleared leather and fired twice. The man went down. "Are you hit?" Rowan demanded, checking her over with quick hands. No, I'm fine." "Good, because we're about to not be." He grabbed saddles and started throwing them on horses with desperate speed. "Silas is here. He brought an army." "I saw." Evelyn helped with the second horse, fingers fumbling with straps. "He shot someone. In the street. Just for not answering his questions. Then he's past caring about consequences." Rowan cinched the saddle tight, "Which makes him more dangerous than before. Get on." She mounted just as more men appeared at the stable entrance. 4 of them, all armed, all blocking their escape. "End of the line," one said. "Boss wants the woman alive. He doesn't care about." Rowan's hand moved toward his rifle, calculating odds. "Don't." Evelyn touched his arm. "There's too many. I'm not letting them take you." "You don't have a choice." She looked at the men, then back at Rowan. "But maybe I do." Before he could stop her, she dismounted and walked toward Silas's men with her hands raised. "I'll go with you. Just don't hurt him." "Evelyn, no." "It's done, Rowan." She didn't look back. Couldn't. If she looked at him, she'd lose her nerve. "Tell Silas I want safe passage for Rowan Cade out of town. He gets that, and I'll cooperate." One of the men laughed. "You're not in a position to negotiate." "Aren't I?" "Silas wants me alive and unharmed. But if you shoot Rowan, I'll fight. I'll scream. I'll make this so ugly that by the time you get me to Silas, half this town will remember my face and your boss's name." She kept her voice level. "Or you can let one drifter ride away, and I walk to Silas quietly. Your choice." They exchanged glances. The leader shrugged. "Your funeral, but the man stays until we've got you secured." Silas was waiting in the street where she'd first seen him, still mounted, looking like a king surveying conquered territory. When he saw Evelyn approaching between his guards, something shifted in his expression, triumph mixed with rage, mixed with something that might have been relief. He dismounted slowly and walked toward her. "Evelyn." Her name in his mouth sounded like ownership. "You've led me on quite a chase." "I didn't ask you to follow me." "No. You just stole from my family, destroyed property, and ran off with a criminal." He stepped closer and she forced herself not to retreat. "Did you really think I'd let that go?" "I didn't steal anything. Thomas left me that money. It was mine." "Thomas left you nothing. Everything he had came from me, which means everything you took belongs to me." His hand shot out and grabbed her jaw, forcing her to look at him. "Including you. I'm not property." "You are until you marry me and become my wife. Then you'll be family. See how generous I'm being?" She tried to pull away, but his grip tightened. "Where's Rowan?" "The drifter, being dealt with." Silas's smile was cruel. I told my men to let him ride out. Didn't say anything about not shooting him once he was clear of town. Evelyn's stomach dropped. You promised, Ishad. I promised nothing. You assumed. He released her face and grabbed her arm instead, dragging her toward where his men had brought a wagon. Now you're going to get in this wagon, and we're going to ride back to Montana, and you're going to marry me like you should have 6 weeks ago. And if you fight me, I'll make sure what's left of your friend Cade suffers before he dies. She wanted to fight, wanted to scream, but she was surrounded by armed men in a town too scared to help, and Rowan was outnumbered and possibly already dead. So she got in the wagon. Silas tied her wrists personally, checking the knots with satisfaction. Comfortable? Go to hell. Eventually, but not today. He climbed onto his horse and signaled his men. We ride north. Don't stop except for the horses. I want to be across the territorial line before sunset tomorrow. They moved out, leaving Mineral Springs behind. Evelyn twisted in her seat, searching for any sign of Rowan. The livery was visible for maybe half a mile before the road curved and took it out of sight. She didn't see him. Didn't see his body. Didn't see anything except dust and distance. Either he'd escaped or he was dead, and she'd never know which. The journey north was brutal. Silas pushed hard, stopping only when the horses absolutely couldn't continue. Evelyn rode in the wagon with her wrists bound, guarded by 2 men who watched her constantly. At night, they camped in cold silence. Silas came to check on her once, standing over her with an expression she couldn't read. You could have made this easy, he said. Could have just accepted what was inevitable and saved us both a lot of trouble. Nothing about you was inevitable. No? He crouched beside her. Your husband died in debt to me. His property, including you, became mine by law. That's about as inevitable as it gets. That law was bought. The will was forged. You know it, and I know it. Doesn't matter what I know, matters what I can prove. And I can prove you're a thief who ran from legal obligations. His hand touched her hair, possessive. Once we're married, all of this goes away. The charges, the chase, everything. You'll be respectable again. I was never not respectable. You ran off with a man who wasn't your husband, lived alone with him for weeks. You think that doesn't damage your reputation? Silas smiled. But I'm willing to overlook it. Take you back, make you a Mercer again. All you have to do is stop fighting. Evelyn met his eyes. I'll fight you until I die. Then you'll die tired. He stood and walked back to his own bedroll. Get some sleep. We've got a long way to go. She lay awake most of the night, watching stars wheel overhead and thinking about Rowan, about whether he'd made it out, about whether he'd try to come after her or cut his losses and run. She hoped he ran. Hoped he was smart enough to know some fights couldn't be won. But part of her, the part that had started hoping for impossible things, wanted him to be stupid enough to try anyway. They crossed back into Montana territory on the 4th day. Silas announced it like a victory, gathering his men to toast their return to civilized country. The celebration felt obscene. Almost home, he told Evelyn that night. Another 3 days and we'll be in Red Hollow. Wedding's already arranged. Judge Morrison's waiting. The whole town will attend. The whole town can watch me refuse. You won't refuse. You're smarter than that. He poured himself whiskey from a bottle one of his men had brought. You'll stand there. You'll say the words, and then we'll move forward. Together. I'll never be with you. Not willingly. Don't need willing. Just need legal. He drank deeply. Love's overrated anyway. Respect, fear, obligation, those last longer. The casual cruelty of it made her sick. This was the man who wanted to own her life, who thought marriage was just another form of property deed. She turned away from him and closed her eyes, and tried not to think about what came next. On the 6th day out from Mineral Springs, they were ambushed. It happened at dawn, while the camp was still waking. One moment there was quiet. The next bullets were cutting through the morning air like angry hornets. Silas's men scrambled for weapons. Evelyn threw herself flat in the wagon bed as gunfire erupted from the rocks above their camp. She couldn't see the attackers, but she could hear them, at least 3 rifles, firing with disciplined precision. Return fire, Silas roared. Find them. His men tried, but the attackers had position and surprise. Within minutes, 2 of Silas's guards were down, and the rest were pinned behind whatever cover they could find. A voice called out from the rocks, rough, and familiar and impossible. Let her go, Mercer. This is your only warning. Rowan. Evelyn's heart stopped and restarted. He was alive. He'd followed them, and he'd brought help. Silas grabbed his rifle and fired blindly toward the voice. You're outnumbered, Cade. Give up now, and I'll make it quick. You've got 6 men left, and they're all exposed. I've got 3 shooters in cover and all the time in the world. Another shot rang out, and one of Silas's men cried out, Make this easy on yourself. Never! Silas looked around wildly, then his eyes landed on Evelyn. He moved fast, grabbing her from the wagon and dragging her up as a shield. You want her? Come get her! The shooting stopped. Coward, Rowan's voice carried clearly. Hiding behind a woman. Practical man, Silas corrected. He pressed his pistol to Evelyn's temple. Now you're going to walk out where I can see you, or I'm going to paint this camp with her brains. Silence from the rocks. Then Rowan appeared, walking down from his position with his hands raised, rifle slung across his back. He looked thinner than Evelyn remembered, worn down by hard travel and harder choices, but his eyes were clear and absolutely furious. Let her go, he said quietly. Put down your weapons first, all of them. Rowan complied, unbuckling his gun belt and setting it on the ground. Done. Now release her. Not quite done, Silas gestured to his remaining men. Secure him and find the others. They grabbed Rowan, binding his hands while 2 others climbed into the rocks searching for his companions. They came back empty-handed. Nobody up there, boss, just spent shells. Silas's eyes narrowed. He was bluffing. There's no one else. Actually, a woman's voice called out. There's me. Catherine Reeves stepped into view from behind a different set of rocks, rifle aimed at Silas's head. And me, said another voice, McCready, the old trader, appearing from yet another position. And me, came a third voice that Evelyn didn't recognize. Silas looked around at the new arrivals, calculating quickly. This doesn't concern you, lady. It concerns me when Montana trash brings violence into Colorado territory. Catherine's rifle didn't waver. And when they cross back in, I take it personal. We're in Montana. By about 50 feet. I'm willing to cross the line for a good cause. She smiled, cold and dangerous. Now you're going to let that woman go, and you're going to ride back to whatever hole you crawled from, and you're going to forget she exists. There's a legal warrant. Don't care about your warrant. Don't care about your property claims. Only thing I care about is making sure you learn that some people can't be owned. Catherine took a step forward. Last chance. Let her go, or I drop you where you stand and sort out the legalities later. Silas's pistol pressed harder against Evelyn's temple. You won't risk her. Won't I? Catherine's expression didn't change. I've made harder choices. Buried the consequences too. You really want to test me? For a long moment, nobody moved. The morning sun climbed higher, throwing everything into sharp relief. Evelyn could feel Silas's pulse racing where he held her, could smell his sweat and rage. Then his grip loosened. This isn't over, he said, shoving Evelyn toward Rowan. I'll hunt you both to the ends of the earth. You can try. Catherine kept her rifle trained on him. But every step you take west, you'll be in my territory, and I protect what's mine. Silas mounted his horse, his remaining men scrambling to follow. Before he rode out, he looked at Evelyn one last time. You were supposed to be mine, he said. You still are. The law says so. The law's wrong, Evelyn said, and so are you. He spurred his horse and galloped north, his men following. They disappeared over the ridge, and the sudden quiet felt like the aftermath of a storm. Rowan moved to Evelyn, checking her over with hands that shook slightly. Are you hurt? No, I'm... She couldn't finish, just grabbed him and held on while her whole body started trembling with delayed shock. You came for me. Of course I came for you. His arms went around her, solid and real. Did you think I wouldn't? I thought they'd killed you. They tried. I convinced them otherwise. He pulled back enough to look at her face. And then I tracked you for 6 days and called in every favor I had to get here in time. Catherine approached, lowering her rifle. You two make a lot of work for people. Thank you, Evelyn managed. I don't know how to repay... Don't thank me yet. Silas isn't done. Men like him don't quit just because they lost one fight. She looked at Rowan. How much ammunition do you have left? Enough for maybe one more ambush. After that, we're relying on threats. Then you need to move fast. Get across the border. Keep going until you hit the coast. Catherine gestured to Macready and the third man. We'll ride with you for the next 100 miles. Make sure Mercer doesn't double back. Why are you doing this? Evelyn asked again. Really? Catherine's expression softened slightly. Because I meant what I said before. Someone helped me once when I needed it. And because watching powerful men lose is one of life's great pleasures. She mounted her horse. Now stop asking questions and start riding. They rode hard for 3 days, Catherine and her people providing rear guard, while Rowan and Evelyn pushed west. At night, they camped together, and Catherine told stories about building her ranch from nothing, about fighting off claim jumpers and corrupt officials, and men who thought a woman had no right to own land. You remind me of myself, she told Evelyn one night. Same stubbornness, same refusal to accept what everyone says is inevitable. How did you make it work? Evelyn asked. Building something from nothing. Started small, saved every penny, made allies where I could and enemies when I had to, learned to fight, learned to negotiate, learned when to do which. Catherine poured coffee. Most important thing I learned was that you can't build anything if you're looking over your shoulder constantly. At some point, you have to stop running and start planting roots. Even if people are still chasing you, especially then. Because the only way to win is to build something they can't tear down. Something with foundations too deep to dig up. She looked at Rowan. You planning to stick with her? That's not my decision to make. It's both your decisions. Catherine's gaze moved between them. But running together and building together are different things. You two figured out which one you're doing? Neither of them answered. On the third night, Catherine and her people turned back. This is as far as we go. You're deep enough into Colorado that Mercer won't risk following. Not immediately, anyway. What if he does? Evelyn asked. Then he'll find out what happens to people who ignore my warnings. Catherine shook hands with both of them. Good luck. Build something worth keeping. She rode north with her men, leaving Rowan and Evelyn alone under a sky full of stars. California's still 500 miles, Rowan said quietly. We should keep moving. Or we could stop. Evelyn looked at him. Catherine's right. We can't run forever. We can run until you're safe. I'm never going to be completely safe. Silas will always be out there, always looking, but I can either spend my life hiding from him or I can build something he can't touch. She took a breath. I want to build. Rowan was quiet for a long time. Where? San Francisco, like we planned. It's big enough to disappear in, far enough that Silas's reach will be thin. She pulled out Thomas's portfolio, which she'd managed to keep through everything. I've got $8,000 in business knowledge. That's enough to start small. Doing what? What I'm good at. Tailoring, bookkeeping, managing accounts. She met his eyes. Building something that's mine. Ours, Rowan said quietly. If you want. Is that what you want? He looked away, jaw working. What I want doesn't matter if it's not what's best for you. Let me decide what's best for me. Evelyn moved closer. I know what you're thinking, that I'm confused, that I'm just grateful, that I'll regret this once we're somewhere safe and I have time to think clearly. Aren't you? No, I'm terrified and exhausted and angrier than I've ever been in my life, but I'm also clear-headed enough to know what I want. She touched his face. I want someone who sees me as an equal, who trusts me to make my own choices, who will build something with me instead of for me. Evelyn? I'm not asking you to save me anymore, Rowan. I'm asking you to stay. There's a difference. He closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, something had shifted. I don't know how to do this. Build things. Stay in one place. Be the kind of man you deserve. Good. Because I don't know how to do it either. We'll figure it out together. She smiled. Badly, probably. We'll make mistakes. We'll fight. We'll struggle. But we'll do it as equals. As equals, he repeated. Then finally he smiled back. California, then. California. They rode into San Francisco 6 weeks later, two people with almost nothing except each other and a stubborn refusal to quit. The city rose from the bay like something from a dream, Buildings stacked on hills, ships crowding the harbor, people from every corner of the world mixing in streets that never seemed to sleep. It was chaotic and beautiful and exactly what they needed. Evelyn found a small storefront near the waterfront, cheap because the previous tenant had gone bankrupt. She signed the lease using a new name, Evelyn Clark, her maiden name, resurrected and claimed. Rowan found work on the docks, using his back and his hands to earn honest money. At night, they shared a tiny apartment above a bakery and slowly began building something that felt like a life. It wasn't smooth. They fought about money, about decisions, about the constant low-level fear that Silas would somehow find them. Evelyn had nightmares where she was back in that wagon, bound and helpless. Rowan still slept with a loaded rifle next to the bed. But they kept going. Evelyn's tailoring business grew slowly. She took in mending at first, then started making simple dresses. Her reputation for fair prices and good work spread. Within 6 months, she had enough customers to hire help. A young widow named Sarah, who needed work and didn't ask questions about Evelyn's past. Rowan moved from dock work to construction, joining a crew that built warehouses and homes for the city's endless expansion. He was good with his hands, good with people, and eventually started taking on jobs independently. A year after they arrived, Evelyn opened a second shop. 2 years after that, she owned the building and employed 15 women. And Silas never came. Oh, they heard rumors. Stories about a Montana rancher who'd lost everything to fraud investigations, about properties seized and officials arrested, about a powerful man brought low by his own corruption. But the man himself never appeared. "You think he gave up?" Evelyn asked one night, 3 years after they'd fled Red Hollow. "I think he ran out of money and options. Rowan was sketching plans for a house he wanted to build. Or maybe he finally accepted he couldn't own you. I hope he's bitter about it." "I'm sure he is." He set down his pencil and looked at her. "Does it matter?" She thought about that. 3 years ago, it would have mattered desperately. She would have wanted Silas punished, destroyed, made to suffer for what he'd tried to do to her. Now? Now she just wanted him gone from her thoughts. "No," she said finally. "It doesn't matter. He's there, and I'm here, and I won. We won." "We won," she agreed, and kissed him. Outside their window, San Francisco hummed with life. Ships calling in the harbor, streetcars rattling past, people chasing their own impossible dreams. And inside, 2 people who'd started with nothing built something that was entirely, defiantly theirs. 3 years became 4, then 5. And the past started feeling like something that had happened to different people. Evelyn's business, officially registered as Clark and Associates Fine Tailoring, occupied an entire building on Montgomery Street by then. The ground floor held the main shop with its polished display windows and elegant fitting rooms. The second floor housed the workroom where 23 women cut and sewed and embroidered. The third floor was office space where Evelyn managed accounts and met with clients who wanted custom designs. She'd built exactly what she'd told Rowan she would. Something that was hers. Something Silas couldn't touch even if he tried. Rowan's construction company operated out of a warehouse near the waterfront. He employed 16 men and had contracts to build 3 new commercial buildings along the bay. The work was good, the money steady, and he came home most nights with sawdust in his hair and a tiredness that came from honest labor instead of running. They'd married quietly 2 years earlier in a ceremony attended only by their closest friends. No church, no spectacle, just a judge, and 2 witnesses and vows they wrote themselves. Evelyn wore a dress she'd designed specifically for that day. Simple, elegant, nothing like the wedding she'd never wanted with Thomas, or the forced marriage she'd escaped with Silas. This marriage was hers, theirs. A choice made freely without anyone's pressure or expectations. "You happy?" Rowan had asked her that night, in the small house they'd finally saved enough to buy. "I'm terrified," she'd answered honestly. "I keep waiting for something to go wrong." "Me too, but maybe that's just what happiness feels like when you're not used to it." They'd learned to live with that terror, to function despite always expecting disaster. And slowly, imperceptibly, the fear had dulled. Not disappeared. Evelyn still sometimes woke from nightmares about being dragged back to Montana, and Rowan still checked locks twice before bed. But they'd learned to build a life around the broken places instead of letting the broken places define them. The letter arrived on a Tuesday in October, 5 years and 7 months after they'd fled Red Hollow. Evelyn found it on her desk between fabric swatches and order forms, delivered with the regular mail. The handwriting on the envelope was unfamiliar, but the return address made her hands go cold. Red Hollow, Montana. She stared at it for a full minute before opening it, heart pounding with the old familiar fear. Inside was a single page, written in a woman's careful script. Mrs. Cade, you don't know me, but I knew your late husband Thomas. I'm writing because I thought you should know that Silas Mercer died 3 weeks ago. Heart failure, the doctor said, though those of us who knew him suspect it was more like the weight of his sins finally crushing him. The Mercer properties were seized by the territorial government last year after investigations into fraud and corruption. Everything Silas built fell apart once people weren't too scared to testify against him. Judge Morrison was removed from office. Sheriff Garrett fled to avoid prosecution. The ranch where you lived with Thomas sits abandoned now, windows broken, land gone to seed. I don't know if this news brings you peace or pain, but I thought you deserved to know that the man who hunted you is gone. You're free of him, truly free. May you find whatever happiness you've built worth keeping. Margaret Patterson. Evelyn read it 3 times, waiting to feel something. Relief, maybe. Triumph. Some sense of closure. Instead, she felt nothing, just a distant recognition that a chapter had closed, followed by the realization that she'd already moved past it. Silas was dead. And it didn't matter. She folded the letter carefully and put it in a drawer with other documents she kept, but rarely looked at. Then she went back to reviewing the latest order requests because she had a business to run and clients who depended on her. That evening, she showed the letter to Rowan. He read it silently, standing in their kitchen while dinner cooked on the stove. When he finished, he set it down and looked at her. "How do you feel?" he asked. "I don't know. I thought I'd feel more." She stirred the pot, watching vegetables bubble. "Is that wrong? Should I be celebrating?" "There's no should. You feel what you feel. I spent so long being afraid of him, running from him, building defenses against him coming back." She set down the spoon. "And now he's just gone. And I realized somewhere along the way I'd already let him go." Rowan pulled her close and she leaned into him. "That's not wrong. That's winning. It doesn't feel like winning. Because you've been winning for 5 years. This is just confirmation." He kissed the top of her head. "He lost the day you got on that horse and rode away. Everything after was just him refusing to accept it." They ate dinner and didn't talk about Silas again. What was there to say? A bitter man had died bitter. The world moved on. But the letter stirred something in Evelyn, a restlessness she couldn't quite name. A week later, she made a decision. "I want to expand," she told Sarah during their weekly planning meeting. "Not just more shops, something different." Sarah looked up from the ledger she'd been reviewing. Over 5 years, she'd gone from quiet widow taking and mending to Evelyn's business partner, co-owner of 30% of the company. Different how? A training program. For women who need work but don't have skills. Widows, abandoned wives, girls who aged out of orphanages. We teach them tailoring, bookkeeping, whatever they need to support themselves. Evelyn had been thinking about this for weeks, the idea crystallizing gradually. We give them what no one gave me, a real chance. That's expensive. Training takes time, and time costs money. I know, but we're profitable enough to absorb it. And once they're trained, some will stay on as employees. Others will start their own businesses, maybe even become our suppliers. She pulled out sketches she'd been making. "I'm calling it the Clark Foundation. We'd start small, maybe 5 students at a time. See how it goes." Sarah studied the plans, then smiled. Thomas would have thought this was insane. Thomas thought everything that didn't directly profit him was insane. And Rowan? Rowan thinks I should do whatever makes me happy, which is why I married him instead of running screaming in the opposite direction. They launched the Clark Foundation 6 months later, converting the top floor of the Montgomery Street building into classroom and workshop space. The first class had 7 students, 5 widows, 1 abandoned wife, and a 19-year-old who'd been working in a factory and losing fingers to machines. Evelyn taught them herself at first, showing them how to cut patterns and keep accounts and negotiate with suppliers, how to see themselves as business owners instead of charity cases, how to build something that couldn't be taken away. "Why are you doing this?" one of the students asked during the second week. Her name was Anna, and she'd lost her husband to consumption and her home to debt. What do you get out of it? Peace, Evelyn said honestly, and the satisfaction of watching powerful men realize they can't keep women dependent anymore. Anna smiled at that. I like that reason. The program grew. By the second year, they had 20 students and had placed 15 graduates in jobs or helped them start small businesses. By the third year, they'd opened a second location and were training 40 women at a time. Other business owners started noticing. Some approached Evelyn about creating similar programs. Others hired her graduates, recognizing quality work and reliable employees. You're changing things, Catherine Reeves wrote in a letter. She and Evelyn had kept up correspondence over the years, trading news and advice, making it harder for men like Silas to trap women with no options. That's the real victory, not his death, but the fact that you're preventing others like him from succeeding. Evelyn hung that letter in her office, next to her business license and the first dollar she'd earned in San Francisco. She was 34 years old now. Gray was starting to thread through her hair, and lines were forming around her eyes from squinting at ledgers. She'd gained weight from no longer running constantly, and her hands bore calluses from work and scars from accidents. She looked nothing like the terrified widow who'd fled Montana. She looked like someone who'd survived. You ever think about going back? Rowan asked one night. They were in bed, the window open to let in ocean air. To Montana, just to see it. Why would I want to see it? Closure, maybe. Proof that it can't hurt you anymore. Evelyn considered that. I don't need proof. I already know it can't hurt me. Going back would just be giving it attention it doesn't deserve. She rolled over to face him. Do you want to go back? No. But I wonder sometimes if running from places gives them more power than they deserve. Like we're admitting they won. They didn't win. We left because staying would have destroyed us. Now we're here, and we're happy, and they're there still being miserable. That's not them winning. That's us choosing better. He was quiet for a while. You're right. I just think about Sam sometimes, about how he died trying to fix a broken system, and I ran instead of fighting. You didn't run. You survived. There's a difference. She touched his face. Sam fought the system, and it killed him. You chose to build something outside the system, and it gave you life. Neither choice is wrong. Feels wrong sometimes. I know, but feeling guilty for surviving is just another way of letting them win. She kissed him. We're allowed to be happy, Rowan, even though other people suffered, even though we couldn't save everyone. We're still allowed this. He pulled her closer. When did you get so wise? I'm not wise. I'm just tired of feeling guilty for not dying when someone thought I should. They fell asleep tangled together, and Evelyn didn't dream of Montana at all. The trouble came from an unexpected direction. A lawyer appeared at Evelyn's office on a Wednesday morning, well-dressed and carrying a leather portfolio that screamed expensive legal problems. Mrs. Cade? He extended a hand. My name is Harrison Webb. I represent the Mercer estate. Evelyn's blood went cold, but she kept her expression neutral. The Mercer estate no longer exists. Silas died and his properties were seized. Most of them, yes. But there was one property that fell through the cracks. A small parcel purchased under your late husband's name, Thomas Mercer. You were listed as co-owner. He opened his portfolio. The territorial government just discovered it during final audits. As Thomas's widow and co-owner, you're entitled to claim it or disclaim it. But either way, they need your signature. He showed her the documents. The property was the ranch. Her ranch. The one she'd worked for 4 years and fled from 5 years ago. Somehow it had survived the investigations, probably because it was in Thomas's name instead of Silas's. What happens if I claim it? She asked. It becomes yours. You can sell it, manage it remotely, or return and operate it yourself. The land is good from what I understand, just needs investment. And if I disclaim it, it reverts to the territorial government and will be auctioned. Proceeds would go to settling remaining Mercer debts. Webb studied her. Though I should mention, the property is worth approximately $30,000 at current market value. That's not money to walk away from lightly. $30,000. Enough to expand the foundation dramatically. Enough to help hundreds of women instead of dozens. I need to think about it, Evelyn said. Of course, I'll be in San Francisco for 2 weeks. You can find me at the Palace Hotel. He stood to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, Mrs. Cade, I've read the case files. I know what Silas tried to do to you. If it were my decision, I'd say you've earned that property 10 times over, but the law doesn't care about earned, only about legal. After he left, Evelyn sat at her desk for an hour, staring at the documents without seeing them. That night, she told Rowan everything. $30,000, he said slowly. That's significant money. I know. You could do a lot with it. Help a lot of people. I know that too. She pushed the papers across the table. But I'd have to go back to get it. Have to stand in that house again, walk that land, face everyone who watched Silas try to force me into marriage. You don't have to go personally. You could sign it over to someone to manage the sale. Could I? She met his eyes. Or would that feel like hiding, like I'm still afraid of them? There's no shame in avoiding places that hurt you. I know, but maybe you were right before. Maybe going back would prove it can't hurt me anymore. Maybe I need to see it powerless before I can fully let it go. Rowan reached across the table and took her hand. Whatever you decide, I'm with you. We can go together, or you can go alone. Or we can sign the papers here and never think about Montana again. Your choice. That was the thing about Rowan that still surprised her sometimes. He never pushed, never assumed he knew what was best for her. He just offered support and let her choose her own path. I want to go, she said, surprising herself. I want to stand in that house and know I survived it. Know I'm not the frightened widow they tried to break. Then we'll go. They took the train to Montana in early spring, when the territory was shaking off winter and trying to remember how to be beautiful. The journey took 4 days, and Evelyn spent most of it watching landscape scroll past the window, remembering the desperate flight in the opposite direction. She was different now, stronger, wealthier, powerful in ways that had nothing to do with land or men's opinions. But still, her hand shook when they finally pulled into Red Hollow Station. The town had changed. Or maybe she'd changed and was seeing it clearly for the first time. It looked smaller, shabbier, like prosperity had packed up and moved elsewhere. The hotel where Silas used to hold court was under new management. The general store had different owners. People stared when they recognized her, but nobody approached. Nobody challenged them. Where's the ranch? Rowan asked the station manager while arranging for a wagon. Mercer Place? About 2 miles north. Road's rough, though. Nobody's maintained it in years. They drove out in late afternoon, following a track that was indeed rough, rutted from seasons of neglect. When the house came into view, Evelyn felt her breath catch. It looked haunted. Windows broken, porch sagging, paint peeled down to bare wood. The barn she'd fought so hard to save was partially collapsed. Fields that had been productive were overgrown with weeds. 5 years of abandonment had turned her former home into a ghost. You okay? Rowan asked quietly. I don't know yet. They walked through the house together, their footsteps echoing in empty rooms. Evelyn saw the kitchen where she'd made coffee for Rowan that first morning, the study where she'd discovered Thomas's final gift, the bedroom where she'd lain awake so many nights listening to her husband's troubled sleep. All of it empty now. Dead. Powerless. I worked so hard here, she said, standing in what used to be her workroom. I thought if I just managed the accounts better, kept things running smoother, it would be enough. That I could make it into something good. You did make something good. Just not here, like Rowan touched her shoulder. You made it in San Francisco, where no one could take it from you. I could rebuild this place. The idea came suddenly. Bring in people to manage it. Turn it into something productive again. You could, or you could sell it and use the money to build something new somewhere else. Somewhere without ghosts. Evelyn walked to the window and looked out over land she'd once thought of as hers. She could picture it restored, fields green, barn rebuilt, house full of life again. Could see herself coming back occasionally to check on operations, to prove she'd reclaimed what Silas tried to steal. But did she want that? She thought about the Clark Foundation, about the women she was teaching to build their own futures, about Sarah and Anna and all the others who were learning that they didn't need men's permission or approval to be successful. No, she said finally. I don't want to rebuild it. I want to let it go. You're sure? I'm sure. She turned to face him. This place represents everything I was trying to escape. The idea that a woman's value comes from the property she can manage or the man she can please. I don't want to waste energy reviving it. I'd rather use that energy building things that matter. They sold the ranch through Webb a week later. Evelyn signed the papers without hesitation and used the money to purchase a building in San Francisco that became the foundation's permanent home. Large enough for classrooms, dormitories for students who needed housing, and administrative offices. The day they opened the new facility, Evelyn stood in front of 60 women, students, graduates, teachers, partners, and felt something she'd never expected. Not triumph, exactly. Not vindication. Just quiet satisfaction that she'd taken everything meant to destroy her and used it to build something that mattered. 5 years ago, she said to the assembled group, I was running from a man who thought he owned me, thought he could force me into a life I didn't choose just because he had money and power and the law on his side. She paused, looking at faces that reflected her own struggles back at her. He was wrong. The law was wrong. And everyone who told me I had no choice was wrong. I'm not going to stand here and tell you running was easy. It wasn't. I was terrified every day. I made mistakes. I had help from people I'll never be able to repay. She glanced at Rowan, who stood at the back of the room. But I kept going. And eventually I stopped running from something and started running toward something, toward this. She gestured to the building around them. This place exists because someone tried to trap me, and I refused to stay trapped, because I learned that the only person who gets to decide my worth is me. Because I decided other women deserved the same chance. One of the newer students, a girl named Beth, who'd been beaten by her husband before he died in a factory accident, raised her hand. What if we're not strong enough? What if we fail? Then you fail and you try again. Evelyn's voice was firm. Strength isn't about never falling down. It's about getting back up, about refusing to believe the people who say you can't. She smiled. And you're stronger than you think, all of you. You're here, aren't you? That alone proves you're survivors. The applause was modest but genuine. After the gathering ended, Evelyn found herself cornered by Margaret Patterson. You came, Evelyn said, surprised. Margaret had written occasionally over the years, but they'd never met in person. I wanted to see what you'd built. Margaret looked around the facility with obvious approval. It's impressive. Thank you for your letter. About Silas. I wasn't sure if I should send it. Didn't know if you'd want to know. I needed to know. Not for closure exactly, but just to confirm he was really gone. Evelyn studied the older woman. In your letter, you said you knew Thomas. I did. He used to come into the store sometimes, usually drunk, always sad. He'd talk about you. About how he didn't deserve you, how he'd trapped you in a life you didn't choose. Margaret's expression softened. He knew what his brother would try to do, knew he couldn't stop it. That letter he left you, he showed me a draft once, asked if I thought it would be enough. Enough for what? To make you leave. He was afraid you'd stay out of loyalty or duty, afraid Silas would convince you it was inevitable. Margaret touched Evelyn's arm. He loved you, in his broken way, wanted you free even if it meant admitting he'd failed you. Evelyn felt tears prick her eyes. I wish I'd understood that while he was alive. Would it have changed anything? No, probably not. She wiped her eyes. But it might have made those years easier if I'd known he saw me as a person instead of just a housekeeper. He saw you. Just couldn't figure out how to tell you while he was drowning in his own failures. They talked for another hour, filling in gaps from the past 5 years. Margaret told her about Red Hollow's slow decline, about how the town had fractured once Silas's corruption became public knowledge, about Judge Morrison's disgrace and Sheriff Garrett's flight. The town that protected him turned on him fast once they weren't scared anymore, Margaret said. That's how it goes with bullies. They're only powerful until people remember they have options. Evelyn thought about that long after Margaret left, about how fear could make people complicit in their own oppression, about how the same people who'd watched Silas try to force her into marriage had likely celebrated when his empire collapsed. Human nature, she supposed, neither as good nor as bad as anyone wanted to believe. Just complicated and self-interested and capable of changing when circumstances shifted. That night, lying beside Rowan in their home, Evelyn finally felt the last piece of the past settle into place. I forgive him, she said into the darkness. Silas? Thomas, for being weak, for not protecting me better, for leaving me that mess to escape from. She turned to face Rowan. He did his best with what he had. It wasn't enough, but it was something. and that something saved my life. You saved your own life. Maybe. But Thomas gave me tools I didn't know I needed. The money, the property deeds, the letter to you. He couldn't save himself, but he tried to save me. That counts for something. Rowan pulled her close. What about Silas? You forgive him too? No. He made choices Thomas never made. He chose cruelty, chose to hunt me across territories rather than accept losing. She was quiet for a moment. But I also don't hate him anymore. He's just a sad man who died angry because he couldn't own things he wanted. That's punishment enough. You're generous. I'm tired of carrying anger. It's heavy and it doesn't change anything. She kissed him. I'd rather spend my energy building things than destroying them, even in my head. Years passed. The foundation grew. Evelyn and Rowan grew older, grayer, more settled into themselves and each other. They never had children. Both had decided early on that they'd had enough of raising things from broken foundations. But they had students, employees, friends who became family. They had a home that felt safe and work that mattered, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing they'd built exactly the life they'd chosen. Sometimes Evelyn would think about the girl she'd been at 26, standing at Thomas's graveside with no idea what was coming. She'd want to go back and tell that girl it would be okay, that the terror and running and desperate fear would eventually transform into something like peace. But she also knew that girl wouldn't have believed her. Some lessons could only be learned by living through them. On their 10th anniversary of arriving in San Francisco, Rowan surprised her with a trip to the ocean. They stood on the beach watching waves crash against rocks, and he pulled out a small box. "What's this?" Evelyn asked. "Open it." Inside was a silver compass, beautifully made, with their initials engraved on the back. "So you always know which way is forward," Rowan said quietly. She turned it over in her hands, feeling the weight of it. "I already know which way is forward. It's wherever you are." "That's sentimental nonsense. It's true nonsense." She kissed him. "Thank you. For coming after me when I was captured. For building this life with me. For never once making me feel like I owed you something for helping me. You don't owe me anything. You never did. I know. That's why I love you." They stood together watching the sun set over the Pacific, two people who'd run from everything and ended up finding exactly what they needed. Not a perfect life. They still fought sometimes, still struggled with money and business and the general difficulty of existing. But it was theirs, chosen freely, built carefully, and defended fiercely when necessary. Evelyn thought about writing her own story someday, about putting down on paper everything that had happened between that funeral in Red Hollow and this moment on the beach, about documenting how a woman with nothing but fear and determination had escaped, survived, and eventually thrived. But then she decided against it. Some stories were better lived than told, better experienced than explained. The past was done, the present was enough, and the future was whatever they chose to make it. Years later, long after both Evelyn and Rowan had died peacefully in old age, someone found records of the Clark Foundation in a San Francisco archive, found photographs of Evelyn standing surrounded by hundreds of women she'd trained and helped, found letters from students thanking her for giving them lives they'd never imagined possible, found a newspaper clipping from 1892 showing Evelyn Cade accepting an award from the city for her contributions to women's economic independence, found a small silver compass in a display case, engraved with 2 sets of initials and a date that meant nothing to anyone anymore. And they pieced together a story about a woman who'd refused to be owned, who'd run across territories to escape a forced marriage, who'd built something meaningful from nothing. They called her a pioneer, a feminist, an inspiration. But Evelyn, if she could have heard them, would have laughed at those grand titles. She'd been none of those things. She'd just been a person who'd kept moving forward when staying still meant dying, who'd accepted help when it was offered and gave help when she could, who'd learned that freedom was something you built daily, not something granted by others. She'd been flawed and frightened and fierce when necessary. She'd made mistakes and hurt people and failed more often than she'd succeeded. She'd been, in other words, exactly as human as anyone else. And in the end, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.